Chapter 97. Su Lu should have been proud, but he was not. The excitement he should have felt was not as strong as people thought. He looked at the last image of the black mech leaving in a sorry state on the screen and just smiled happily. His interest was still in mech repair. Piloting a mech was exhilarating, but it was not his goal in life. The war between the Federation and the Empire had subsided for more than 10 years. In an era where peace was gradually becoming a habit, Su Lu did not plan to enlist in the military. Naturally, he did not think that becoming a mech pilot was his future choice. Perhaps it was because of what happened to Uncle Boss and his forced exile, as well as the privileged class like the Zhou siblings, that Su Lu did not have much of a good impression and trust of the Federation government. In comparison, he actually had a much better impression of the anti-government faction led by Senator Macklin. Of course, if the Empire once again brazenly invaded the Federation, Su Lu would not run far away just because of his dislike of the government. He would definitely do his duty as a citizen of the Federation. In just a moment, Su Lu thought of his life many years in the future from the black mech on the screen. This kind of absent-mindedness rarely happened to him except when he was doing mech repair work. Suddenly, an extremely loud rumbling sound came from his stomach. Su Lu looked down with a bitter expression, almost fainting from the strong sense of hunger. The set of strange movements and the mysterious power in his body that Uncle Feng Yu had taught him, other than the obvious trembling, the biggest drawback was probably the hunger after every use of the power. Su Lu, who had been in a tense state when he ran out of Area H1, did not feel this. Now that he had truly relaxed, he suddenly understood that the words hungry intestines were indeed very thin and dry. It was like a thin soup without much water, and when written, it would take one's life. The image on the screen returned to the forum of the school's intranet. A post that was marked red by the administrator entered Su Li's line of sight. He stared blankly at the ID of a girl, who was obviously asking Prince Black Ji to be her dance partner for the Double Moon Festival dance party with a love-struck tone. The key point was that the girl had attached a picture. Thus, the post was filled with curses, mainly from the girl. As for Su Lu, who was in a state of absolute hunger, he hurriedly turned off the light screen, clutched his stomach, and ran out of his bedroom. When he thought of that girl's face, it was as if he was suddenly full. In the busiest business district of Linhai, there was a quiet street. Bustle and quietness were not contradictory. The so-called quietness in the bustle was a kind of style, while the quietness in the bustle represented a kind of nobility that exuded the smell of money ink. On this quiet street that was about 200 meters long, the most famous luxury stores in the Federation were gathered. The decorations were elegant, but they had a noble aura. There weren't many customers, but each of them had a reserved look on their faces, fully displaying the attitude of keeping the poor at 1,000 miles away. It was just past noon. Customers of high status or wealthy families wouldn't choose to shop in the snow. However, the uniformed ladies in the CU brand clothing stores still maintained a standard smile. Their hands were clasped in front of their stomachs, and they politely looked at the air outside the store. It was as if a rich man would appear at any time. With a crisp sound, the small bronze bell at the door rang. The female service staff in the fitting uniform became spirited at the same time. Their smiles became more gentle, and they went forward to welcome the visitor. However, when they saw the young man who came in, their smiles could not help but stiffen, and they almost could not maintain the image of etiquette that had always been strictly observed. This was because the young man who came in with the light snow was wearing a student uniform that was commonly seen in the university town. In such cold weather, he was still wearing thin clothes, and his clothes were somewhat old. He really did not look like a rich man. In this world, there were many rich kids who liked to play tricks and pretend to be poor. These young ladies had seen many of them, but they also knew that those rich kids only liked to play. No one liked to deliberately make things difficult for their own bodies in this terrible weather. What made them even more sure that this young man did not have the slightest ability to buy was, this young man walked into the store while looking at the price tags on the clothes with a shocked expression. The most unbelievable thing was that in his hand, he was holding 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake that could only be bought at a small stall in the university town. The most unbearable thing for the GU store staff was that these 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake had the same gap. Obviously, this young man was eating all 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake at the same time, and swallowing so many in one gulp. Would such a poor person, who was so hungry, enter the famous GU clothing store to buy things? The expression of the manager on duty changed slightly, but she still smiled politely at the young man. Then, she signaled with her eyes for a female employee to come forward and serve him. Although she was very unwilling to let the smell of deep-fried dough cake on this poor young student ruin the faint smell of incense in the GU store, no one could deprive the poor of their right to shop, and she could not do that either. She could only think of a way to ask this poor young student, who was probably here to avoid the snow, to leave quickly. "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" a female employee asked softly. Su Lu, who had been staring blankly at the price tags on the GU clothing, suddenly came back to his senses. He suddenly noticed that the delicate and pretty employee's eyes were inconspicuously sliding over the deep-fried dough cake in his hand. Only then did he realize that he was inappropriate. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, I'm too hungry." The female employee forced a smile and did not reply, but her expression faintly revealed that she did not welcome him. Su Lu could not help but sigh in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm here to get some clothes." "Get some clothes?" The female employee was slightly taken aback. She could not believe her ears. The GU store's custom-made clothes were extremely expensive. Was this poor young student sure that he had not come to the wrong place? She subconsciously repeated, "Are you sure?" These 3 words were said very impolitely. Even the good-tempered Su Lu frowned slightly. The manager on duty also knew that her subordinate had made a mistake, so she hurried over to them in an attempt to ease the atmosphere. However, Su Lu just shook his head and said, "Shi Qinghai ordered 2 sets of clothes. Take them out and let me have a look." This was the first time he had walked into a place that truly belonged to the rich, especially when he thought about how these 2 sets of clothes would cost him tens of thousands of yuan. When Su Lu thought about how he only had 300,000 yuan left in his card, he was a little dazed. Hearing the female employee's words, anyone would get angry, but Su Lu did not want to care about it. After all, this was not Department 23's TV series. Did he really have to take out his gold card later and buy all the clothes in this clothing store to make these female employees' eyes turn red and feel defeated? Although it felt good to play the pig to eat the tiger, the problem was that he really did not have that much money, Su Lu thought with a wry smile. Then he took the 2 sets of clothes and took out his bank card to pay for them. At this time, the manager on duty and the female employee had already apologized multiple times, and the rest of the female employees in the store had successfully gotten rid of the shock on their faces. They just felt that things were getting weirder and weirder in this world. The fitting room is inside. Please follow me. The manager on duty did not take the bank card with a large limit and politely invited Su Lu to follow her inside. She glanced discreetly at the 3 deep-fried dough cakes in his hand that had been bitten into crescents and said with a smile, "Can I wrap up your food for you first?" Looking at the energetic young man in front of the full-length mirror, Su Lu was quite satisfied with the dark-colored suit. He carefully adjusted the position of the collar, tilted his head, and took a few more looks before the pain in his heart subsided slightly. This faintly glowing dark-colored suit fit him very well. Su Lu did not know how the GU store had done it, but he could only admire Shi Qinghai's eyes as a special agent of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. He actually remembered his figure so clearly. The snow outside the window was gradually getting heavier. Su Lu looked at it worriedly, wondering what kind of work Shi Qinghai was delayed by. He hoped that it would not be too troublesome. "It suits you very well." In order to make up for the lack of staff in the GU store, the female manager who had accompanied them all the way gave a very short and polite comment. It made people feel happy just hearing it. "I still need to wait for a friend to try on the suit." Sulu retracted his gaze from outside the window and said to the female manager. The female manager smiled warmly and pointed to a quiet area in the corner of the store. Please wait there for a moment. We have prepared some pastries and coffee for you. You are welcome to try them. Sulu smiled and his mood improved. He walked over there. Of course, he would not object to free food. After all, he was very hungry at this time. The female manager accompanied him in that direction. She was also in a good mood. She did not expect this young man to have such a good temper. He did not take advantage of the impolite mistake made by the staff in the store earlier. What made her mood even better was that although it was snowing lightly in Linhai and the weather was bad, several groups of customers had already appeared in the store just after noon. It seemed that today's performance was not bad. As the manager of the GU store, she obviously knew that tonight was Lihua University's Double Moon Festival dance party. However, the rich kids among the students had already ordered their outfits. She didn't know why the guests who suddenly appeared today were in such a hurry. It has nothing to do with me whether I'm in a hurry or not. I hope you can do it for me. A cold and proud voice rang out in the GU store. It was a group of young men and women who were choosing their suits. The one who spoke was a young man about 20 years old. His companions were lucky enough to have chosen their suits. He was the only one who had not chosen a suitable ready-made suit. If the GU store wanted to order a suit, it would take a long time in advance. Everyone knew this. However, time was indeed tight, so he was a little anxious. The manager went up to him and explained a little, but she could not get the other party's understanding. She could not help but sigh in her heart. When this group of customers entered the store, she already knew that they were all people whose names were on the GU VIP list. She could not understand why these big shots, who usually only appeared in the special capital district or the largest city in S1, would appear in Linhai at the same time. Sulu was sitting on the sofa, eating pastries, drinking coffee, and enjoying the warm spring air. He was leisurely waiting for Shi Qinghai. He did not notice the trouble on the other side because it had nothing to do with him. However, he did not expect that trouble would find him in the next moment. My friend, your figure seems to be very similar to mine. I really like the suit you're wearing. I have an urgent need for it tonight. Take it off. I'll pay 10 times the price. Sulu raised his head in shock and saw the young man looking down at him. It was Su Li's wish to help others, but he would never stoop so low. Especially when this person seemed to speak calmly, but in reality, there was a sense of righteousness and order in his bones. Thus, Sulu lowered his head and treated this man as heir. You're very rude. We're talking to you, but you don't even look at us. Another proud girl who was dressed like a princess frowned and spoke. She looked at Sulu, who was eating and drinking non-stop on the sofa, with disgust. Sulu frowned. He was just thinking that life wasn't a TV series, so why was he always encountering such inexplicable things? He raised his head and looked at the proud girl who was not ugly, even beautiful, and said seriously, Miss, your figure is very similar to my girlfriend's. She should like your suit very much. Also, we have an urgent need for it. Take it off. I'll pay twice the price. That man was willing to pay 10 times the price, but Sulu was only willing to pay twice the price. The same words were stabbed back. This showed that a calm and gentle young man could occasionally be quite lethal when he was mean. Hearing this, the group of young men and women were stunned at the same time. They did not expect that someone would use such a calm and mocking tone to reply to them. The beautiful proud girl was so angry that her eyes were cold. Sulu looked at her and the man beside her gently and said, I know this is a very rude request, so I take it back. His meaning was very clear. What you did was impolite. You can take it back, or you can only become heir in your eyes. You're going to the Double Moon Festival ball tonight? That man coldly looked at Sulu on the sofa and said, We're going too. Maybe we'll meet again. But I'll repeat myself. You're really not willing to take off your suit in exchange for 10 times the price and my forgiveness for your previous disrespect? Sulu did not expect that these people would be so impolite. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. He thought of the Zhou siblings he met at the entrance of the nightclub. He thought that these so-called people born with a golden key in their mouths were probably so impolite. They were also going to the Double Moon Festival ball tonight. It was just a routine ball in a university. These people who were obviously not students of Yue University wanted to join in the fun. You're rich, I'm poor. Sulu looked at him and shook his head. You might not see me at the ball. As for disrespect, I forgive your previous disrespect to me. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere became even weirder. The group of young and rich men and women quietly looked at Sulu on the sofa as if they were looking at a monster. Sulu was still drinking his coffee with his head lowered. In his heart, he was cursing Shi Qinghai for picking such a place. Why did he have to enter a non-human clothing store and meet a bunch of non-humans? Chapter 98. It was snowing outside the window, and the atmosphere in the bar was very cold. It was just past noon, so there weren't many customers. Shi Qinghai held a cigarette between his thin lips like he was sucking on a lollipop. He stared at the flickering red light on the end of the cigarette. He was bored to death. His beautiful peach blossom eyes moved closer to his nose because of his concentration, which made him look a little funny. The wooden door of the bar was pushed open, and the cold air rushed in. Shi Qinghai put out the cigarette and pulled out the seat beside him. He looked at the white hair on the man's temples and asked, "What would you like to drink?" "Alcohol," the director of Linhai's HTD bureau said directly after he sat down. Shi Qinghai frowned. He knew this person very well. He used to be a teacher, but he later became a leader and a superior. He knew that this person had always been cautious and didn't like to drink. But he didn't ask anything. He snapped his fingers and asked the people in the bar to bring him a glass of hard liquor. The Tai family seems to have already contacted Representative Pabre. The director almost choked on the hard liquor. He coughed and said softly, "If Pabre can get the support of the Tai family, his chances of winning in next year's presidential election will increase by a few points." The Tai family has always been very low-key. So low-key that most people in the Federation have forgotten about their existence. Shi Qinghai admitted that before this intelligence gathering, he didn't pay much attention to this former royal family that had been glorious for countless generations. He raised his glass and took a sip. Even if they used to have the entire Federation, it's been more than 60 constitutional years. How much hidden power can they still have? How can they influence the presidential election? Don't underestimate the existence of the 7 great families. This has been proven in the history of the Federation. Although the Tai family is the most secretive of the 7 great families, if our guess is correct, they should also be the most powerful family among the 7 great families. The director lowered his head and said with a slightly worried voice, "They may not be able to make someone directly elected president, but they can easily make someone's opponent lose. Destruction is always easier than construction." "I understand that." Shi Qinghai's eyes were calm. "However, although I have always despised politicians, I have to admit that Pabre from Donglin is an anomaly among politicians. If the moral standards and practical spirit he has shown all these years are just a disguise, then I can only say that Pabre played the role of a saint very well. You know what I mean." Shi Qinghai continued, "If Pabre becomes the president of the Federation, it will be the best choice for the organization. At least if we want to negotiate, we won't have to worry that the Federation government will be as fickle as before." The bureau chief waved his hand and said, "Morality doesn't mean everything." Pabre, in his election platform and political practice over the years, has always been very careful not to reveal his attitude towards the 4 states surrounding S2. As for the relationship between the Federation government and us, no one knows what kind of thoughts he has. If he chooses to take a strong offensive attitude towards the organization under the influence of the hawks in the Department of National Defense in the future, Shi Qinghai noticed that the bureau chief's eyebrows were full of worry. The bureau chief sighed and said, "Right now, the 4 states surrounding S2 seem to be enveloped by the joy of the end of the civil war and the arrival of peace. Senator Medellin has always adhered to the principle of nonviolence. In order to maintain the unity of the comrades, the organization is unable to fully prepare for war. If Pabre chooses to use force to suppress the 4 states after he is elected president, I am very worried that our comrades will be utterly defeated. The current president is a cowardly and incompetent person, but Pabre is different." The bureau chief said worriedly, "A president who came out of a family of miners must have set extremely high ideals at a very young age. This kind of person is very determined and will definitely not allow the existence of anti-government armed forces within the Federation, especially within the capital ring. But these are all pre-existing worries." Shi Qinghai glanced at the bureau chief and said, "Today, you took the risk of meeting me under the pretext of a teacher-student reunion. I don't think that's all you want to say." The bureau chief shook his head and looked at the snowflakes outside the window. Suddenly, he said softly, "I just feel that something is going to happen recently, so I came to see you. If there is any problem in the future, I will delete your file immediately. Other than me, he is the only one in the organization who knows that Lin Hai's old eagle is you. You know, he never cares about specific matters. Even if you want to leave, the organization will not find out. At that time, you will be truly free." This sentence was extremely inauspicious. As the 2 most successful anti-government spies within the Federation, Shi Qinghai and the bureau chief had already mentally prepared themselves for the possibility of death at any time. However, when they suddenly heard this sentence, Shi Qinghai could not help but frown. He looked at his teacher quietly and said slowly, "Freedom is indeed something I like very much, but I don't want to use your death as a condition." He patted his teacher's shoulder and said softly, "These past few years have been very tiring for me. I have been constantly sending back information to the 4 states around the mountains, but I also have to watch that old bastard Macklin continuously throw flirtatious glances at the Federation. I feel very uncomfortable. But teacher, you should know that the reason I am able to persevere until today is because I agree with the organization's philosophy. This world does indeed need to change, but the organization will never use assassinations and terrorist attacks that may affect civilians as a way of fighting. I only hope that this philosophy can be persevered." Shi Qinghai leaned back on the leather sofa and lit a cigarette. He slowly said in the midst of the smoke, "If one day, the organization violates this principle, then I can only leave the organization, even if it may lead to me being killed." "What are you trying to say?" The bureau chief frowned and looked at his proud disciple. "Is it about the Double Moon Festival Ball? What did you discover?" "I just don't understand why the organization is so concerned about the Crown Prince's coming-of-age ceremony. I can understand why Macklin sent that little girl who doesn't know anything." Shi Qinghai flicked the ash from his cigarette and said calmly, "The 7 major families are the biggest vested interests of the Federation. I don't think the Tai family is likely to cooperate with us. If that's the case, what's the point of spending so much to obtain this information? You think the organization will use this Double Moon Festival Ball to assassinate the Crown Prince?" The bureau chief asked seriously. "Yes, other than this, I can't think of any other possibilities. The organization rarely assassinates public figures of the Federation because it will greatly damage the organization's image." The bureau chief looked at Shi Qinghai sternly and said, "Not to mention, the Double Moon Festival Ball will be held in the university town. There will be too many innocent citizens. Your speculation is disrespectful to the organization's principle. I don't trust anyone, except you." Shi Qinghai didn't give up his speculation under his teacher's stern gaze. "And if the organization really does assassinate the successor of the Tai family, you and I will be completely unaware. I can only say that we will be the ones who will be abandoned in the future. You can't convince me because the organization's assassination of the successor of the Tai family is not beneficial to our business at all. Cleaning up the sins of the 7 major families in history is the organization's principle." Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes slightly. And just as you said earlier, the Tai family has already contacted Councilman Pabre. You also analyzed that Councilman Pabre might be leaning towards the Eagle faction. If that's the case, why didn't the organization choose to eliminate Councilman Pabre's greatest support before he becomes the president? The Tai family only has one successor for 7 generations. Shi Qinghai continued his analysis calmly. If we say that this family is the most terrifying existence in the Federation, then from a certain perspective, it is actually the weakest existence. As long as this successor dies, this family will definitely fall apart due to the lack of a successor. The bureau chief was silent for a long time. He suddenly wanted to meet his student, Shi Qinghai, because he had some suspicions about the recent movements of the organization. Whether it was Councilman Medellin or those important figures in the Federation, it was necessary for them to get close to the Tai family and show goodwill to the successor of the Tai family. Only the anti-government forces that had resisted the Federation for decades had no reason to care about the whereabouts of the successor of the Tai family, unless the higher-ups of the organization really had some ideas. After a long silence, the bureau chief slowly opened his mouth and said, "But have you thought about it? In the Federation's capital, Xinglinhai, assassinating the successor of the Tai family is basically an impossible mission. Even if there are some radicals in the organization, I don't think there are too many idiots. I believe in this. Even I spent a few months to confirm the successor's exact location. This is enough to show the opponent's strength and cautiousness." Shi Qinghai shrugged and said, "I just hope that you will be more careful during this period of time, and pay more attention to the people and information coming from the other side." "What are you going to do?" The bureau chief slowly drank the remaining amber liquid in the cup and asked with a slightly red face. "Tonight is the Double Moon Festival Ball. I will personally go and watch. No matter who the organization sends to carry out this plan, I will make sure that he fails." Shi Qinghai's tone was very calm. "You are going against the organization. I hope that this kind of unpleasant thing won't happen. But if the organization really does this behind our backs, without trust, there will only be shameless use and silencing afterwards. I am no longer a member of the organization." The bureau chief sighed and looked at this young official who was usually very lazy but was now as cold as a knife. He said, "Maybe we are thinking too much. Maybe tonight's ball is just a vanity show for the rich kids. Maybe the higher-ups of the organization really just want to change their way of thinking and try to get in touch with the real power in the Federation in order to seek a more peaceful future." Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and smiled. He raised his cup and said, "If that is the case, then that is for the best." The last intelligence report said that the Tai family's coming-of-age ceremony has a very strange rule. If they just want to get in touch with the successor, we don't have as many female students as Senator Macklin. Although I am pretty, I am still a man after all, am I not? The bureau chief laughed and said, "We would never sell out women. That is so tasteless." After a while, he calmed down and said with a smile, "The latest order from the higher-ups of the organization is to use all means to get in touch with the successor." "Damn it, you just said that now." Shi Qinghai was stunned for a moment and then cursed, "Looks like tonight's ball won't be a problem. Just be careful." The bureau chief patted him on the shoulder. "Then I will go first. I have a meeting with a friend. It has been delayed for too long." Shi Qinghai walked in the direction of the GU store on the quiet streets of Linhai. He hadn't walked far when he frowned. He lowered his head and glanced at his wristwatch. He pushed open the top cover and saw a line of words appear on the hidden display below. "Don't worry about the ball, because he is here." The address is, Shi Qinghai was stunned. The only person who could contact him in this way was his teacher who had just broken up with him, the old guy who was the bureau chief of HTD. Obviously, the old guy had just received this information and was very happy or excited when he forwarded it to him. That was why he spoke so casually. Shi Qinghai looked at the line of words in astonishment. Looking at the word him in the second sentence, he suddenly felt that things in the world were incomparably absurd. Earlier, when he was talking with his teacher, he was still talking about him, and now he was here. But why did he come to Linhai? How dare he come? If he really came, it seemed that the organization's attitude toward the Double Moon Festival Ball was really biased toward peace. The organization would never let him take such a risk. Shi Qinghai forgot to brush the snowflakes off his long eyelashes. He looked at the words on his watch in disbelief. He couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate when he thought about how he was about to meet that big shot. Every spy had their own code name to facilitate one-way communication. Shi Qinghai's code name was Eagle, and his teacher's code name was Liquor. Shi Qinghai also knew some of his colleagues who had unfortunately been arrested by the Federation, such as Swallow and Crow, who had been sacrificed. In human history, there were countless spies who were famous because of their code names. However, in this constitutional era, the most powerful spies were almost all from the anti-government forces in the 4 states surrounding the mountains. This was because at the top of the anti-government forces spy system, there was a person with the code name him. He was the second in command of the anti-government forces, and the closest comrade of the anti-government forces leader. In the eyes of Shi Qinghai and the others, he was an amazing professional. The Federation had never obtained enough information about such a high-level leader. The anti-government forces had been resisting in the 4 states of S2 for many years, but no one in the Federation knew what the second in command looked like. This alone proved how terrifying he was. In the thin snow and light wind, Shi Qinghai couldn't help but shiver. He was about to pick up that person, and then, attend the Double Moon Festival Ball. He came to Linhai to meet the young master of the Tai family. But what could the anti-government forces and the Tai family talk about? Shi Qinghai, who could still maintain a calm heart and a lazy smile on his face even when the seawall collapsed in front of him, couldn't help but feel a little shaken after receiving this information. In the past few years, he had obtained a lot of information about the Federation for the anti-government forces. He helped the people in the 4 states to not only survive the battle, but also helped the moderate faction in the anti-government forces to gain a lot of benefits in the local elections. It could be said that he was one of the most successful spies in the anti-government forces in recent years. But in the face of his direct superior's superior. In the face of that, him, who no one had ever seen, Shi Qinghai had no confidence at all. He had to ensure his absolute safety in Linhai, and arrange for him to meet that young man at the Double Moon Festival Ball. The huge pressure made Shi Qinghai frown in an instant. This pressure made him only notice the abnormal situation and hear the specific details of the conflict when he walked into the GU store. With just a glance, Shi Qinghai guessed the purpose of the group of rich men and women. He narrowed his eyes and walked over directly. He said to Sulu, who was still drinking coffee, "Let's go." Sulu treated the group of rich men and women as if they were invisible, but he was also a little annoyed. When he saw that Shi Qinghai had finally come, he couldn't help but feel relieved. He stood up and asked, "Do you want me to accompany you to try on the clothes?" "No need." Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes and glanced at those people. His eyes naturally revealed a trace of indifference. "Manager, how many pairs of shoes do you have in the store?" "I want all of them." The group of proud rich men and women had been in a conflict with Sulu. When they saw that fellow's companions had come, they were ready to be the first to flip out. However, they didn't expect that Shi Qinghai would flip out before them. The items in the GU store were very expensive. If they wanted to buy all the shoes in the store, how much would it cost? All of the noble people present had the financial ability to do so, but no one would do such a thing as a nouveau riche. The man who had wanted Sulu to take off his gown looked at Shi Qinghai mockingly and said, "Please continue with your performance." Shi Qinghai ignored him and pulled the beautiful female manager to pay the bill. The female manager had seen strange people who liked to flaunt their wealth, but she still felt that it was a little strange to ask for all the shoes to be packed. Sulu followed behind him, dumbfounded. He asked, "Where did you get so much money?" Don't you have a bank card? Shi Qinghai said. Su Lu smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, I still have more than 100,000 yuan. A pair of shoes here costs a few thousand yuan. How can it be enough to buy all of them? Shi Qinghai smiled warmly and patted him on the shoulder. Brother, you don't know the limit of your card, right? You can overdraft it, and the limit is very high. Su Lu took out the 3 Linlin Alliance bank card that the uncle had given him. He couldn't believe his eyes. He felt very distressed when he saw that the card had been swiped successfully. At this moment, all the shoes in the GU store belonged to him alone. The female manager's performance today was really amazing. She looked at Su Lu with a smile, returned the card with both hands, and said, We look forward to your next visit. Shi Qinghai told the other party to send all the shoes to a certain address tomorrow afternoon. Then he patted Su Lu on the shoulder and proudly walked out of the store under the watchful eyes of the GU store staff. When they walked past the group of rich men, the man sneered and said, So there are indeed a lot of idiots in Linhai. How could they do such a tasteless thing like burning money? Idiot? Who are you talking about? This time, Shi Qinghai didn't remain silent. He turned around with a smile and looked at the man. I just want to know, if a bunch of idiots bought goose gowns but can't even get a pair of goose shoes, what kind of happy scene would it be when they attend the ball? The crowd was stunned for a moment before they became angry. Only now did they realize that this guy in a wrinkled suit was actually so sinister. In the empire, it was said that the places that ordered the gowns would never make shoes. Also, mixing and matching was a style that was highly praised. However, in the Federation, this was absolutely impossible. It's getting late. Shi Qinghai looked at his watch and said sincerely, I hope you guys can get everything ready before the ball. There are many stores on this street. Do you think I'll buy all of their shoes? Walking in the wind and snow, Su Lu couldn't help but laugh when he thought of the rich men's expressions. He didn't know anything about the etiquette of the upper class, but he could guess that Shi Qinghai's move would definitely make the other party suffer. The next moment, the smile on his face turned into helplessness and distress. He looked at Shi Qinghai and said, So much money. How can I pay it back? Idiot, the goods will be delivered tomorrow afternoon. Cancel this deal in the morning. Shi Qinghai didn't even look at him and said disdainfully, I say, you're too honest. You don't even know how to talk back when you're being bullied by that group of people. You don't even know how to use these little tricks. How can you pretend to be something in society? Su Lu rubbed the back of his head. He wanted to say that he had already said a few harsh words, but he just smiled and said, I'm used to using my hands, not my mouth. Shi Qinghai was stunned. Thinking of the fight between Su Lu and the Special Forces soldier in the nightclub, he couldn't help but laugh loudly on the quiet and luxurious famous inn street in Linhai. I still have something to do. At a corner of the street, Shi Qinghai stopped and looked at Su Lu with a smile. I may have something to do at the ball tonight. You can play by yourself. Maybe you can get that Zhang Xiameng back. The life of a spy was always stressful. When he knew that he was coming, Shi Qinghai was used to being frivolous. He wanted to vent Su Li's anger and relieve his pressure. But since he was here, Shi Qinghai knew that he couldn't accompany Su Lu tonight. Su Lu saw a touch of heaviness in his smile. Thinking of the voice on the phone, he frowned and asked, Are you in trouble? Big trouble. Shi Qinghai smiled bitterly, patted him on the shoulder and said, Let's go. After Su Lu left, Shi Qinghai went to deal with his own big trouble. Next to the fountain in the middle of an extremely lively food plaza, he took a sausage and gnawed on it. While waiting for the arrival of the most mysterious intelligence chief, he cursed in his heart that the synthetic meat was not delicious. Should he ask his teacher to get some wild animals from HTD Bureau for a sumptuous meal? At this moment, a person walked up to him and asked, Is it good? Shi Qinghai turned around and saw a very wretched middle-aged man staring at the sausage in his hand with shining eyes. He was stunned for a moment, then subconsciously handed the sausage over. Chapter 99. The wretched middle-aged man seemed to be very hungry. He swallowed the sausage in one gulp and sighed. Damn, the stowaway spaceship doesn't provide airline meals. How shameless. Young man, where did you go just now? I'm starving to death. Shi Qinghai gasped and said, I went shopping with a friend. That little doorman called Sulu. The middle-aged man's mouth was still stuffed with sausage, so his words were a bit unclear. Okay, take me to eat first. Shi Qinghai smiled bitterly and led the middle-aged man to the restaurant on the third floor. He didn't need to check the secret code at all. The only person who could find him in a crowd, know that he had a friend called Sulu, and be so wretched and ordinary that no one would want to take a second look at him. It could only be him. In the quiet restaurant, Shi Qinghai stared at the middle-aged man across the table. He had already gotten rid of the shock. Yes, he would never have thought that the second in command of the anti-government forces, the one who gave the FBI and the Special Task Force so much headaches that they could not wait to devour his flesh and chew on his bones, was actually such a person. In the spy business, especially for high-level spies, the more ordinary the better. However, Shi Qinghai always felt that this man was a bit ugly. Shi Qinghai was a proud person. After getting rid of the shock, the first thing he said to his boss was not respectful. Do you know how many people in the Federation want you dead? Not many, only 4 people. The middle-aged man lowered his head and ate the noodles. He said vaguely, the President, the Minister of Defense, the Director of the Special Task Force, the Director of the Federation Investigation Bureau. HTD only cares about wild rabbits. If the Bureau of Proclamation cared about me, I would have been dead long ago. Shi Qinghai frowned slightly. After the mysterious aura of the person in front of him disappeared, it was hard for him to get used to it. At this time, he was actually in the mood to joke. It was really hard for him to bear. He couldn't help but say, do you know that if a person of your status suddenly appears in Linhai, I'm the one most likely to be killed? You're ranked second. After the middle-aged man finished his noodles, he raised his head with a smile and said, if you're afraid of death, you'll come. If you're not afraid of death, I'll come with sincerity. Since I've entered this line of work, I can't be afraid of death. Old Eagle, you've done well these past few years. I believe that your arrangements will ensure my safety. Hearing the familiar yet strange codename of Old Eagle, Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows furrowed even more. I didn't prepare at all. How can I bring you into the dance to meet the Crown Prince? He looked at this A-rank wanted criminal of the Federation and felt that there was something familiar about that distorted face of his. He stared at the space between the other's brows and the corners of his eyes, saying, even if you change your appearance right now, it's still too dangerous. Having his disguise seen through by Shi Qinghai, the middle-aged man smiled slightly and didn't care at all. He knew that the young comrade in front of him had his own pride. After a moment of silence, he said, I believe that you've already prepared in such a short time. Shi Qinghai sighed helplessly and handed over an invitation card. Like a magic trick, he took out a bag from his side and handed it over. This is the invitation card and the clothes. The problem is, the field office has always kept a close watch on us employees. If you appear beside me like this and want to follow me into the dance, it'll be hard for others not to be suspicious. How do I introduce you to others? You have a second uncle called Shirda. The middle-aged man smiled and said, from this moment onwards, I am Shirda. He just finished an investigation on the Ore planet in outer space and came back to find you. He'll also go to the dance while he's at it. Shi Qinghai had almost forgotten what his uncle looked like. He asked, where's the real Shirda? He's still carrying out engineering experiments on the Ore planet. If the information from the kids below is correct, he should be on his way to S3. Coincidentally, we can control that spaceship. Shi Qinghai wasn't surprised by the man's meticulous arrangements. If the intelligence chief of the anti-government army made such a mistake, he wouldn't have been able to survive so many years under the pursuit of the Federation. After a moment of silence, he said, I can bring you in, but whether or not you can see the Crown Prince is not up to me. You should know from the return receipt that until now, Yue University has protected him very well. Other than the principal, no one has come close to him, not even the Zhou family. Young man, sometimes when you're in contact with certain people, you don't have to beat around the bush. Perhaps the most direct method is also the most effective method. The middle-aged man smiled and said, I'm not a spy like you. I only think about things more directly. Shi Qinghai stared at him blankly. He thought to himself, the most successful spy chief in the 37th Constitution of Human Society actually said that he wasn't a spy. If he hadn't heard it from this legendary figure himself, he would definitely have thought that this was a very bad joke. If you want to meet the heir of the Tai family, you can only use your real identity. After this is over, my identity will definitely be exposed. What does the organization plan to do with me? When it came to the most crucial part, Shi Qinghai asked directly, I don't want to face the wrath of the entire Federation Investigation Department. The people in the mountains have never had a channel to meet the people with real power in the Federation. After all, we are not people who can appear in public like Mr. Macklin, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Now, this is an opportunity, and it's worth the risk. If the negotiation with the other party goes well, they will definitely use their family's power in the Federation to help us hide everything. If the negotiation doesn't go well, I don't think it will be possible for me to go back alive. If that's the case, it might not be a bad choice for you to accompany me to meet George Macklin. Shi Qinghai's expression changed. He didn't expect this leader of the anti-government army to say something like this. However, he immediately sensed something else from the man's words, especially when he referred to Mr. Macklin as Mr. Macklin. Mr. Macklin was the title of the internal organization of the anti-government army. He frowned and asked, the people in the mountains can't hold on much longer. The middle-aged man still maintained his smile, but there was a sense of vicissitudes and sorrow in his smile. The elections in the 4 states surrounding the mountains were successful. Mr. Macklin received a lot of support. The people who insisted on having their own armed forces, including me, are all feeling a little lonely. The federal military is still preparing for the attack. If the situation continues to develop like this, I don't know how long the people in the mountains can hold on. Shi Qinghai was silent for a long time. He was very worried about the safety of his companions in the mountains, but he was more curious about what benefits the organization was trying to get by taking such a huge risk to send him to attend the coming-of-age ceremony of the successor of the Tai family. After a while, he gave up the urge to ask about the inside story and said seriously, thank you for telling me the truth. I believe in your loyalty to your beliefs. Beliefs don't mean loyalty. I just don't like this federation. Shi Qinghai said with a smile, actually, I've always been very curious about how I should address you other than that too simple code name. You can call me a mountain person, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Sulu didn't know that tonight's Double Moon Festival Ball had become a stage for the people with high positions in the Federation to show themselves. It had even gradually evolved into a competition between the two anti-government forces. He also didn't know that the center of this whirlpool was the young man named Tai Ziyuan. How could he have known that his friend was actually a big shot who could influence the entire Federation? The ball was held in a quiet building in Yue University. The green trees around the building were covered with a layer of frost. Under the illumination of the lights, they looked as beautiful as a jade palace. Su Lu was waiting for Shi Qinghai at the entrance, bored to death. He looked up at the sky and saw that the clouds in the sky had long disappeared. Countless stars surrounded the 2 round moons that were gradually approaching. The scenery was so empty that it made people even more worried. Zhang Xiaomeng will appear at the ball with that congressman's son, right? Su Lu looked at the 2 round moons in the sky and thought with narrowed eyes. His heart was filled with an indescribable emptiness. If Shi Qinghai wasn't coming, perhaps he would have preferred to stay in the H1 area and continue the seemingly never-ending level 6 training. Of course, after what happened in the general gymnasium today, Su Lu wasn't sure if he would have a chance to enter the H1 area again. Someone patted his shoulder. He turned around and was very happy to see Shi Qinghai's face. At the same time, he also noticed that under the other's casual expression, there was a hidden heaviness, and beside him was a middle-aged man. Shi Qinghai didn't want to meet Su Lu tonight, but for some reason, the bold anti-government army leader beside him pointed out Su Li's direction and said he wanted to come over and say hello. "I'm Qinghai's uncle. You're Su Lu, right? I often hear him mention you in his letters." The middle-aged man chuckled and said to Su Lu, "You can also call me uncle." Su Lu was startled. He thought that he had never heard Mr. Shi mention him before, but he still obediently called him uncle. He didn't notice that Shi Qinghai's face was unusually expressive. At this time, Su Li's eyes suddenly became calm, because he saw a line of expensive cars slowly driving to the main road in front of the building. The heavy car doors opened one by one, and a line of well-dressed men and women walked over in a reserved manner. The daughter of the Zhou family, who was wearing a red evening gown, walked at the front. The men and women he saw in the GU store in the afternoon were walking side by side with her. They seemed to be of high status as well. Trouble seemed to be coming. Shi Qinghai whispered a few words to the middle-aged man, but the middle-aged man just smiled and shook his head. Su Lu didn't notice any of this. He was staring at the woman in the middle of the group, Zhang Xiaomeng, who was wearing a light blue silk dress and walking towards him like an elf. Chapter 100. This double moon festival ball at Yue University, because of the existence of a certain descendant of an aristocratic family, had an extremely important symbolic meaning. No one knew that the coming-of-age ceremony for the former successor of the royal family had already been arranged by a fellow named Su Lu. Those politicians and famous businessmen who had obtained the inside information through various channels had all sent their own descendants to participate in the ball, in hopes of forming a relationship with the crown prince of the Tai family. If their daughters could be chosen by Tai Ziyuan to become his life partner in the future, that would be an incomparably fortunate matter. Of course, the people of the 7 great families, those truly important figures, would definitely not lower themselves to take the initiative to express their goodwill or intentions of forming a marriage alliance. At most, they would come to observe the ceremony. At this time, whether or not those low-key second-generation members of the 7 great families would be present at the ball, no one would know. At this time, the group of people who had gotten off the expensive car and were slowly walking towards the entrance with an imposing manner, although they were not from the 7 great families, their family backgrounds were extremely profound. In the eyes of the ordinary citizens of the Federation, they were naturally from a privileged class. Walking at the front of the group, Zhou Yu was wearing a red strapless evening gown today. Her bare shoulders perfectly displayed a bit of sexiness, but the ingenious design of the gown covered most of the spring scenery in front of her chest, making her appear even more delicate. Compared to the cold indifference at the entrance of the nightclub that day, this Zhou family's eldest daughter's face was filled with calmness. She looked more like a young girl who had just entered puberty, and not an arrogant and proud daughter of the heavens. Zhou Yu immediately recognized the 2 young men on the stairs, especially the beautiful hooligan with a repulsive smile and wearing a black GU suit. Her eyes immediately became cold and fiery. The coldness was due to her mood, and the fiery heat was due to her anger. She had never been hit by anyone in her life. Ever since she met the crown prince, even her parents and brothers were incomparably polite to her. Other than this small official from the Federation Investigation Bureau called Shi Qinghai, who would dare to slap her? She led her companions up the stairs and suddenly felt a burning sensation on her face. However, she knew that these people around her were from families with high positions in the Federation. Since they had suddenly come to Linhai to participate in Lihua University's Double Moon Festival dance, they must have some ulterior motives. The eldest daughter of the Zhou family did not want these people to know that she had been humiliated in Linhai, so she decided to forcefully suppress the anger in her heart. She looked straight ahead and pretended that she did not know the two people on the stairs. The rich men and women walked up the stairs, but the three people on the stairs didn't seem to have any intention of letting them through. Su Li's eyes were fixated on Zhang Xiaomeng, who was standing next to the congressman's son, and he had forgotten to step aside. The middle-aged man beside him, on the other hand, was looking at this scene with a smile on his face, as if he didn't know whether to step aside or not. Shi Qinghai, on the other hand, had a lot on his mind. He had been planning his escape after the ball ended, so he didn't have the mood to care about these little kids. The three people on the stairs didn't give way, and the two parties were about to collide. To Zhou Yu's surprise, although she didn't have any intention of causing trouble, the expressions of the rich men and women around her changed. These people recognized the two young people blocking their way. They were the two people who had severely humiliated them in the GU store this afternoon. A well-educated dog would never rudely block a person's way. The man who had contemptuously asked Su Lu to give up his clothes in the GU store this afternoon looked coldly at the three people on the stairs and said this in a mocking tone. Su Lu didn't even have eyes for him. He only stared at Zhang Xiaomeng, who was standing in the group opposite him, and said with some difficulty, "You're here." At this time, the middle-aged man and Shi Qinghai whispered something to each other. It was as if the three people on the stairs didn't see the arrogant man at all. The response to the provocation was disregard, and it was the most humiliating type of disregard. The faces of the man and his companions turned even uglier. Hearing Su Li's words, the son of Lin Hai's councilman, Hai Qingzhou, smiled and lowered his head to look at Zhang Xiaomeng with concern. Zhang Xiaomeng had already seen the familiar figure on the stairs and subconsciously lowered her head. Her long eyelashes rested on her fair face as she said softly, "Yes, you're here too." Hearing Zhang Xiaomeng's reply, Hai Qingzhou's expression changed slightly. The group of men and women also noticed that there seemed to be some problems between the three of them. A moment later, the man found out about the gossip about Yue University from the people around him, and a cold smile appeared on his face. He moved closer to Su Li's ear and said, "So you're just a poor student with good luck." Seeing this scene, does your heart hurt? Where did the arrogance from this afternoon go? Oh right. Miss Shang isn't someone you can get close to. Wake up, but in the future. If I have the chance to get close to her, I'll definitely tell you what I learned. You know, I haven't played with a girl who came back from the 4 states. The man's voice was very soft, so other than Su Lu and Shi Qinghai beside him, no one heard what he said. When Su Lu saw Zhang Xiaomeng walk in with the councilman's son, his mood had already hit rock bottom. When he heard this, he finally reacted and slowly took a step back, as if to avoid the man's bad breath. He looked at the man from the capital and said seriously, "Do you want to fight?" The man laughed out loud, as if he found it amusing to hear such a low-level threat at such an important event. He shook his head and laughed, "I'm not a rude student like you. I won't do things like fighting, but if there's a chance, I'll let you have a taste of being beaten." When he said the last sentence, the expression on his face had become extremely cold. He had already made up his mind that after the ball was over, he would definitely let his bodyguard teach this young student who dared to not give him face the most profound lesson. He thought his words were very appropriate and dignified, however, Su Lu didn't pay attention to what he said at all. He raised his fist and punched the man's face. With a muffled sound, 2 streams of blood spurted out from the man's nostrils, and one of his front teeth flew out. "Since you want to fight, then let's fight." Su Lu repeated and threw another punch, directly smashing that young master to the ground. When he swung his fist, the stuffiness in his chest dissipated a lot. He was too lazy to care about what kind of trouble he would get into afterwards. Just like what he had said to Shi Qinghai in the afternoon, when faced with other people's unreasonable ridicule and vicious words, this orphan from the Donglin district was only used to using his hands, not his mouth. Under the green trees and bright lights, the entrance to the ball was in an uproar. Countless students and teachers who were attending the ball cast their eyes on the scene. Those who were at the center of the incident couldn't hide the shock on their faces. They only saw young master's son go up and say something to the student who blocked his way, and then that student punched young master's son to the ground. Was that student crazy? How dare he hit someone in front of so many people? However, what made these rich kids disappointed was that Sulu didn't seem to be crazy at all. He just calmly punched the man, and this calmness made them feel even more confused. In the afternoon, the beautiful girl in the GU store screamed and supported the man who was rolling down the stone steps. She pointed at Su Li's nose and scolded him in a sharp voice, "Do you know who we are? How dare you hit my brother?" The son and daughter of Sun Chungsuan, a member of the Energy Source Committee of the Federation Management Committee, would never have thought that there would be someone who dared to hit them like a sandbag after leaving the capital and coming to Linhai. After hearing the girl's words, Sulu frowned. He thought to himself, "Of course I don't know who you are. I only know that your brother is asking for a beating. Security, where's the security?" Of course, it wasn't convenient to bring bodyguards into the ball today. The group of rich kids looked angrily at Sulu on the steps and shouted loudly. At this time, Shi Qinghai had finished whispering with the middle-aged man. He walked in front of Sulu and welcomed the anger of those people. After a moment of silence, he suddenly laughed and said, "This world is really interesting. My brother asked you if you wanted to fight. Since you want to fight, then it's normal for you to be hit." He withdrew his smile, and there was a hint of sarcasm in his calm voice. "Of course I don't know who you are. I think you want to tell me who your parents are. But we never care about this kind of thing. I just think it's funny that you want to ask about family background when you want to fight. You're not kids anymore. Are you going to cry and go home to find your parents when you're hurt?" Shi Qinghai didn't know what had just happened, but he knew that Sulu, who looked calm at this time, was in a very bad mood. As a friend, he didn't need to be reasonable. He had to stand in front. Of course, because there was that horrible uncle of his at the ball today, he didn't want to stand out, but his uncle gave him an order. He stared at Zhou Yu, who was in front of the crowd, and thought that it was this unruly woman who had caused the current situation. He said calmly, "Miss Zhou, haven't you had enough of those slaps last time? Do you want Director Zhou to drag you back to the capital again before you're satisfied?" Zhou Yu wanted to keep a low profile today because she thought that tonight would be the most important day of her life. But she didn't expect that the rogue official on the steps would say in front of everyone that she felt the most humiliated thing. Her face suddenly became extremely cold. She stared at Shi Qinghai and said, "Shi Qinghai, there's a ball tonight. I don't want you to die now." The people at the entrance of the ball were shocked by the scene of a student beating up the Federation representative's son, but they were immediately attracted by this conversation. They listened in disbelief. Only now did they know that the young miss of the Zhou family had also suffered at the hands of these two young people. These years, the Zhou family siblings were extremely arrogant in that circle. Who could make her suffer? Everyone looked at Sulu and Shi Qinghai in a different light. They kept guessing who was behind them. Zhou Yu took a deep breath, suppressed the anger in her heart, and said to her companions, "Today is my home ground. Give me some face." Someone helped the young master of the Sun family, whose face was covered in blood, up. The young master of the Sun family used a handkerchief to wipe the blood from his nose. He looked at Sulu gloomily, thinking that after the ball was over, he would make this young man beg for death. Zhou Yu noticed Su Li's gaze and wanted to warn him, but after thinking about it for a moment, she didn't say anything. Instead, she looked deeply at Sulu. Because of this poor student, the Crown Prince had crippled Hook and banned Zhou Yu from entering Linhai province. Even she was a little afraid of such a person. Chapter 101. You did a good job today. I suddenly find myself appreciating you. Shi Qinghai looked at Zhou Yu's red evening gown with a smile. However, those two gentle, affectionate, and pure gazes made Zhou Yu feel as if he was naked and extremely uncomfortable. For some reason, Shi Qinghai, who had a wanted criminal of the anti-government army with him, should have kept a low profile, but at this time, he was so arrogant. But you still have to take care of the dogs around you. Of course, Xiaomeng is not included. This group of young men and women were not good people, especially after the young master of the Sun family suffered a big loss. In their hearts, they had already sentenced Su Lu to be disabled for life. Their eyes were full of disdain, coldness, and pity. It was only because of Zhou Yu's suppression that they did not immediately settle the score and maintained a little demeanor. At this time, when they heard Shi Qinghai's aggressive and unrestrained words, they almost couldn't bear it anymore. Only dogs understand the etiquette of well-educated dogs. Shi Qinghai looked at these people and said with a smile, "In fact, sometimes I really don't understand you second generations. You can't beat others in scolding or fighting. Besides being born into a good family, what's the use of you in this life? Don't try to threaten me with that kind of look. What so you can't do you think you can do? Don't forget that the Federation is a society ruled by law. It is a place that is reasonable. If you really annoy me, I'll let the Federation TV station expose your virtues. I'm sure your family will be very disappointed." Shi Qinghai, that's enough. Hearing this rogue official mention her brother again, Zhou Yu's tender face darkened. She coldly scolded, "If you think you haven't vented your anger, you can make a scene at the ball later. Don't block the door and make a fool of yourself. It's you who are making a fool of yourself. I'm not worried about anything." Shi Qinghai looked at her with a gentle smile, but pulled Su Li's arm to the side to make room for him. "I'll invite you to dance at the ball later. I hope you won't refuse." Zhou Yu's expression changed for a moment. No one knew what she was thinking. She said a few words to her companions. The group of people walked past Su Lu and Shi Qinghai with different expressions, but they didn't use their eyes or actions to provoke them. Speaking of which, the combination of Su Lu and Shi Qinghai was indeed very effective in dealing with these rich second generations. The gatekeeper had a calm personality, but when things came to a head, he would take action without hesitation. Mr. Shi also had a mouth that could make people vomit blood. The so-called, well-versed in both pen and sword, referred to this pair. The ball had not yet started, but soft music was already coming from the building. Su Lu withdrew his gaze from the light blue gown and looked up at the sky. Shi Qinghai patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, "Even if it's a foregone conclusion, there's no need to pretend to be lonely in front of me. It's too mushy." Su Lu smiled bitterly. He had beaten up that person and thought that there would be a fierce conflict. He didn't expect that the other party would force himself to swallow his anger. He shook his head and said, "I found that there's something wrong with my personality. I used to think that I was a very tolerant person, but after coming to Li Hua, I found that there are many things that I can't tolerate. Everyone has a bottom line. If the son of Sun Village didn't touch your bottom line, with your honest personality, how could you explode?" Shi Qinghai smiled and said, "After the ball is over, be careful." But his family is different from the Zhou family. They don't have any military background. They don't have a gun. With your skills, you can beat up their bodyguards, to vent your anger." At this moment, the middle-aged man who had been silently watching the young man's farce with a smile suddenly looked up at the sky. After a while, he sighed and said, "Look at the two moons in the sky, they really look like a pair of beautiful breasts." Su Lu and Shi Qinghai raised their heads in astonishment, only to see two bright full moons gradually approaching each other in the dark blue night sky, overshadowing the radiance of the stars in the sky. The two bright moons were perfectly round and pure white, and if one really thought about it, it was indeed somewhat similar to that part. During the day, it was still snowing, but at night, it was a good time to admire the moon. It was said that for this ball, Li Hua University used extremely powerful connections and mobilized the climate interference team of the federal military to create such a beautiful blue night. With such beautiful scenery in the sky, it seemed that it didn't matter if they spent a little more money. Shi Qinghai looked up at the moon and smacked his lips for a while. As a playboy, he couldn't help but feel that this uncle next to him was a confidant. Thinking of this, the alienation and reverence he had for this person in his heart lessened a lot. Only then did he realize that those gorilla guys in the mountains were not as boring as St. George. Sulu shook his head and thought, this uncle next to me is indeed the uncle of the rogue Mr. Sure. He has a lot of knowledge. He can even think of the beautiful scenery of the 2 moons in the sky as erotic. For a moment, he also classified this uncle as a pervert. But he would never have thought that the person next to him was a terrifying person. In the official files of the Federation, accompanied by the melodious melody of Damon's violin, Lihua University's Double Moon Festival Ball officially began. It hadn't reached the stage of dancing yet. The male students, who had faint excitement and a sense of novelty on their faces, were wearing formal clothes that were rarely seen. They held glasses of wine and gathered in groups of 5 or 6 like adults, chatting about something. Sulu and the other 2 walked into the venue without attracting any attention. They chose a quiet and secluded place. I really don't know why I came. Sulu lowered his eyes slightly and took a sip of the champagne in his glass. He thought to himself, the principal really spent a lot of money for this ball. I really wish you didn't come today. Shi Qinghai suddenly said very seriously. Then, he solemnly handed his uncle over to Sulu to manage. He elegantly held his champagne glass and walked to another quiet and conspicuous place in the party. Sulu was slightly surprised. He raised his head and noticed that Shi Qinghai was walking in the direction where Zhou Yu, Zhang Xiaomeng, and the other rich kids were gathered. He couldn't help but worry and said, he's going to cause trouble again. I didn't realize he was such a hot-blooded person. Oh, maybe it's because he has his eyes on a girl. The uncle beside him chuckled and said, Lihua University's Double Moon Festival Ball has a tradition. The boys will use the first dance as a sign of love. But before the invitation, the boys have to make some arrangements beforehand to ensure that they won't be rejected later. You're a student of Lihua University, right? Don't you know about this tradition? Sulu watched as Shi Qinghai walked in front of Zhou Yu, who was wearing a red evening gown. He looked at Zhang Xiaomeng, who was wearing a blue evening gown beside Zhou Yu, who looked like an orchid. He replied with a slightly bitter voice, I know about this tradition. I thought I would have a dance partner today. But my dance partner suddenly didn't want me. You have to learn from Qinghai, or shamelessness in this aspect. Uncle Shi looked over with a smile. On the other side, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu seemed to be trying to convince each other in a low and murderous voice. Sulu looked over in confusion, wondering if Mr. Shi really had his eyes on that venomous woman. He had to admit that Zhou Yu was a very beautiful woman. However, after the incident at the nightclub, in Su Li's eyes, those seductive curves and eyes became illusions. Then, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu left the ball under the surprised gazes of the rich kids. No one knew where they went. Sulu shook his head, and his gaze fell on the sky-blue evening gown again. The middle-aged man beside him noticed his gaze and suddenly said, You like her? Sulu was silent for a moment before saying, Yes. The middle-aged man smiled and said, Trust me, her dance partner tonight should be you. At this moment, the band suddenly became louder, covering their conversation. As the music stopped, the principal of Yue University, dressed in a solemn suit, appeared in front of the microphone on the second floor. With a smile on his face, he looked at the dense crowd of young students downstairs and felt gratified. He said, Welcome, everyone. When the principal was giving a speech, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu returned to the ball at the same time. Sulu looked at Shi Qinghai next to him and noticed that there was a bloodstain on his lips. He immediately associated it with something unsightly that happened in the back garden. He sighed in surprise and said, It turns out that the courage of a pervert can really cover the sky. But why did she go out with you? Shi Qinghai cursed a few words in a low voice and quickly glanced over there. He noticed that Zhou Yu was wiping her lips with a handkerchief with a sorrowful look. It was not something to be proud of to let a girl who dreamed of becoming a princess tonight be utterly defeated in front of a sex scandal file. Although Shi Qinghai was a playboy, he was used to having tender feelings for girls. Looking at the desolation in Zhou Yu's eyes, he could not help but frown. The disgust he had for this proud and cold young lady faded a little. He also did not understand, even if the crown prince did not choose Zhou Yu as his dance partner tonight, how would it help the organization's mission? Thinking of this, he could not help but look at the uncle next to him with disgust. As the second most important person in the anti-government army, he actually paid attention to a girl's privacy. Although he had to admit that this guy had a terrifying intelligence network, he still could not accept this kind of purposeful way of doing things. No one listened carefully to the principal's speech. All the young students who did not know the inside story of the ball were excitedly waiting for the moment when the dance music started. They wanted to enjoy their youth and love to their heart's content. Perhaps there were a lot of lucky people at the ball tonight, but there were also a lot of losers. But they had tried hard to reach out to their love, which was enough for them to remember for a long time in the future. The potting dance finally started, and it flowed through the ballroom like water. Although there were already quite a lot of people, the ballroom still seemed relatively empty. The beautiful melody soothed people's lonely hearts and urged them to dance to the music. Su Le had been looking at Zhang Xiaomeng, who was standing beside the son of the senator in the distance, and his eyes narrowed slightly. The middle-aged man next to him suddenly said, "I just said that her dance partner tonight must be you." Su Le smiled bitterly and said, "Thank you, but that's impossible." "If you take me to the second floor later," the middle-aged man smiled sincerely, "God will definitely satisfy your wish." Chapter 102. Second floor. Only now did Su Le notice that compared to the bustling dance floor below, the second floor was exceptionally quiet. There were a few men wearing dark-colored waiter uniforms on the walkway, and they were vigilantly watching the people approaching. Puzzled, he glanced up and found that other than the principal of Yue University, no one else from the university had appeared, including those highly respected professors. Could it be that there was an important person on the second floor who needed the principal's company? He glanced at the middle-aged man beside him and said with a smile, "One look and I can tell that there must be some distinguished guest of the university upstairs. Even the eldest daughter of the Zhou family and those youngsters know the rules and didn't go up, so how can I? But if I can go up later, I'll bring you along." This had nothing to do with being willing to help others. Su Le purely thought that he was joking. He was only a gatekeeper and auditing student of Yue University. It was already good enough that he could attend the ball today, although he didn't want to attend, he just wanted to see her. But when this joke fell into the middle-aged man's ears, a light flashed through his ugly triangular eyes. He chuckled and patted Su Li's shoulder without saying anything else. At this time, the ball had become lively. Those thick-skinned upperclassmen pretended to be mature and courteous as they sent out invitations to the female students who were wearing all kinds of gowns. Spurred on by this, the people who were originally a little embarrassed began to move towards the goddesses in their hearts. Fortunately, the gender difference in Area S1 was the opposite of Donglin area, and there was indeed a lot of porridge. In a short time, many couples had succeeded. The young people dancing to the music had happy smiles on their faces, while the girls' faces were somewhat shy. No matter how they looked, at least at this moment, they were the most beautiful. Out of Su Li's expectations, there was actually a girl who was brave enough to take the initiative to invite him to dance. He never thought that he, who had an ordinary appearance, would be able to receive the attention of a girl. Shocked, he somewhat hurriedly rejected, not daring to look at the girl's disappointed expression. He had actually underestimated his reputation in Yue University. He was the student that Professor Zhou admired the most in the mechanical engineering class, and he, who had set a few records in the laboratory building, had long since gained a secret admirer after the story of guarding the beauty in the plum garden. To avoid the awkwardness, Su Le subconsciously raised his head and looked into the distance. Coincidentally, he saw Zhang Xiaomeng's action of avoiding his gaze. His heart trembled slightly, and he knew that she was looking at him just now. He took a deep breath and stared at Zhang Xiaomeng for a long time. He watched as Zhang Xiaomeng gently rejected the invitations of many boys. She also did not step onto the dance floor with Hai Qingzhou, the son of the councilman, beside her. His mood improved slightly. He is looking at you. Hai Qingzhou looked at the students who were happily hugging each other on the spacious dance floor and said softly to the girl beside him. Zhang Xiaomeng looked straight ahead with a faint smile on her lips. She replied, I know, but what does this have to do with me? Hai Qingzhou smiled and said, but, you were also peeking at him just now. It seems that your relationship with him is not like what you said, a relationship between a pursuer and a rejecter. Zhang Xiaomeng's eyelashes fluttered. After a moment of silence, she said, it's all in the past. You're really not going to dance with me? You know that I like you more and more now. In order to hide his sadness, Hai Qingzhou lightly shrugged his shoulders. Although I know that if you are going to dance with me, it might be because of some other reason. I'm very sorry. Zhang Xiaomeng said apologetically. I made it very clear to you last time that I cannot accept your good intentions. Her expression became somewhat lonely. She glanced at the dance floor and said, I was very stupid in the past. I have already hurt one person. I don't want to hurt a second person. Hai Qingzhou knew that she was looking at Su Lu. His smile was somewhat awkward. He bitterly smiled and said, it's a pity that I don't even have the qualifications to be hurt by you. It had to be said that this was a very gentlemanly sentence. It was easy for young people with good family backgrounds to show their gentlemanly demeanor in their own social circle. For example, the children of rich families around the two of them, including the young master of the Sun family who had just finished his treatment, were all very polite as they watched everything on the dance floor. They did not reveal the slightest bit of arrogance. The circle that these young people were in was very different from the lively dance party. It was because they were too quiet. Moreover, from their clothes and temperament, it was obvious that they were not ordinary students from Yue University. None of them went down to dance. Naturally, the students would not come forward to invite the princess-like girls. If they did not know Zhang Xiaomeng and knew that she was a student of Yue University. Otherwise, they would not have had the courage to invite her. There was only one exception. Mr. Shi, who was wearing a goose suit, smiled again. He ignored the group's murderous gazes and came in front of them. He elegantly bowed to Zhou Yu and said softly, Can you dance with me? Zhou Yu's expression was unusually cold. She looked at the extremely beautiful and extremely hateful young man in front of her. She knew that the other party was threatening her with the secret. After a moment of silence, she stealthily led Shi Qinghai 2 steps to a quiet place to avoid the ears of her companions. She then said in an extremely low voice, What do you want to do? Shi Qinghai slightly lowered his eyes, as if he did not know how to open his mouth. He slowly said, It's the humble request from before. Please dance with me. How can you be so shameless? Zhou Yu's eyes were as cold as knives. Together with her fiery red dress, she had a terrifying beauty. Because of what happened that day, you want to take revenge? You should know what the first dance of the Double Moon Festival Ball represents. Do you think that I will be threatened by you and ruin the life that I have desired for more than 10 years? Shi Qinghai slightly frowned as he looked at the beauty in front of him. He slowly said, Maybe the future that you have desired for so long is not what you really want. Otherwise, why would you get drunk that night a year ago and then casually give up your virginity? Su Lu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the group of people around Zhang Xiaomeng. He felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. A few songs had already passed, but the well-dressed men and women still did not dance. If they were not here to dance, why would they come to Yue University? He keenly observed that those people seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, he remembered the conversation he had with Shi Qinghai in the bar that night. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked at Zhang Xiaomeng worriedly. At this moment, there was the sound of a slap. Sulu was shocked to see that in the far corner, the eldest daughter of the Zhou family had angrily splashed the champagne in her glass onto Shi Qinghai's face. At the same time, she gave him a hard slap on the face. He did not know what had happened. As he was about to go over to take a look, he was pulled back by the middle-aged man beside him. Although the music in the ball was soft, the countless sweet nothings added together made it a bit noisy. Other than that group of people and Sulu who had been staring over there, not many people noticed this small episode. Shi Qinghai's wet hair draped weakly on his forehead. He silently walked back, stared at his uncle, and then stood beside Sulu. He sighed and said, "A flower with thorns is indeed wonderful." After Zhou Yu, who liked to wear red, rejected Shi Qinghai's threat, she walked back to her friends. However, her fingers holding the empty wine glass were slightly trembling, and her face was slightly pale. The middle-aged man standing behind Sulu and Shi Qinghai suddenly smiled and said, "Qinghai, you can change your name to Lianhua in the future." At this moment, the Double Moon Festival ball suddenly became quiet. The strings of the cello were gently plucked, making a buzzing sound, reminding everyone present that someone was about to speak. The lights gradually dimmed, and a double round silver-white beam of light shot up to the second floor, just like the two moons that could be seen through the transparent dome. In the beam of light, the unknown principal with a head of silver hair stood in front of the microphone. He looked at everyone warmly and said, "Now, please allow me to introduce to everyone a beautiful part of Yue University's history." Applause sounded. Yue University's Double Moon Festival Ball, who knows how many beautiful love stories have been created. Principal Tsong smiled as he looked at the children downstairs. When he thought of the story from 20 years ago, he couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He was very grateful that the Tai family was willing to wait until the ball started to pick a dance partner. At least this way, he didn't have to worry about harming those innocent girls who already had a romantic partner. However, he didn't consider that if that person really wanted to pick a girl who already had a dance partner, it was actually just another way to complete the ancestral love trial. Among these love stories, the meeting between Tai Ji, the successor of the Xiao Shu Foundation, who was studying at our school 20 years ago, and his wife, who was by his side for the rest of his life, was the most touching. Principal Tsong smiled and continued to say, "I'm very happy that the fruit of Mr. Tai Ji and his wife's love is also studying at our school today. Moreover, he will complete his coming-of-age ceremony at this ball today. He will invite a lucky lady to be his dance partner. Of course, if my female student chooses to reject him, as the principal, I will only feel proud." The principal chuckled. The Xiao Shu Foundation was the largest private fund in the Federation. Although not many people knew the real name of the owner of this fund, who didn't know about this fund. When the principal announced the identity of today's mysterious guest, there was a sudden burst of excited discussion in the ball. The girls in the ball immediately imagined that the male student with the surname Tai, who hadn't shown up yet, was a prince riding a white horse. Their eyes were filled with excitement. The spacious ball was completely dark. Only the two full moons in the sky that were about to touch each other spilled silver light through the transparent dome. There were also two beams of moonlight that left the principal's seat on the second floor and started to slowly move. Everyone knew that the girl that was enveloped by the two beams of moonlight when they finally stopped was the dance partner that the mysterious guest had chosen today. The beams of moonlight gradually moved. No matter if the girls were beautiful or ugly, no matter if they had a dance partner or not, they all became nervous. Even if they weren't greedy people, but in this fairy tale-like scene, how could they suppress the desire in their hearts? Chapter 103. A bright and sorrowful violin tune slowly began to play, and when the tune ended, the movement of the two beams of light would stop. When the principal had said that the mysterious guest's surname was Tai, Sulu could not believe his ears. His lips parted slightly in shock, and he immediately guessed the true identity of the person on the second floor. Tai Ziyuan, this poor rich kid who had never even eaten a deep-fried dough cake before, was the main character of today's Double Moon Festival dance party. Su Lu took in a deep breath, suppressing the shock in his heart. Last night, he had wanted to ask Tai Ziyuan if he wanted to attend the dance party with him today. Who would have thought that the other had already arrived, and was even preparing to pick his dance partner like a monarch looking down from above. The beautiful twin moons spilled clear light over the night sky, and the beams of light in the room moved slowly. As long as the beams shone on the girls, they would find it hard to suppress the nervousness on their faces. Right then, the principal's dampening voice rang out once again, mixing in with the beautiful violin tune. With a smile, he pointed out the true identity of the Black Mecha who had brought glory to Pear Blossom University this morning. Su Lu listened, somewhat confused. He thought to himself, it was clearly him in the mecha, so how did it become Tai Ziyuan? However, he also knew that in this school, the only people who could enter District H1 were probably himself and Tai Ziyuan. If the other was willing to help him hide the truth, he would of course be very happy. This news once again caused a commotion on the dark dance floor. Those girls who had still been somewhat reserved, deliberately avoiding the beams of light, now showed expressions of joy. A young male student with an astounding family background, and a legendary character who could make an ace pilot of an entire academy return in defeat, how could they not be moved? The beams of light continued to move slowly. Those naive female students were filled with excitement and longing, praying that the beams of light would land on them. Meanwhile, those who knew Tai Ziyuan's true identity were abnormally excited. The only one who was not interested in this matter was probably Su Lu. Although he was very surprised that Tai Ziyuan's family was more terrifying than he had imagined, what did this have to do with him? In his eyes, the scene in front of him was like an emperor choosing a concubine. In his opinion, this was a great disrespect to women. Even he was a little dissatisfied with the weak rich man who ate supper and went to the brothel with him. The scene was extremely quiet as countless pairs of eyes followed the two beams of light. The male students looked at this scene with envy and slight displeasure, while the female students looked at this scene with reservedness and longing. With the moonlight shining down, it wasn't completely dark. They could faintly see that in the most empty corner of the building, those rich kids who came from afar had tacitly divided into rows, with the girls standing in the front row. Right in the middle was Zhou Yu, dressed in a red dress. However, the light was dim, so it was impossible to see whether her expression at this moment was calm or something else. She closed her eyes slightly, calmed her breathing, and waited for that moment to come. Many years ago, after she met Tai Ziyuan, her parents, brothers, and the people around her seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally made her feel that in this life, she could only be together with that young man who she had not seen for the past 2 years. However, at this moment that concerned her happiness in life, a detestable and roguish beautiful face suddenly appeared in her tightly shut eyes. The owner of that beautiful face had an incomparably evil heart, and her heart twitched slightly. Zhang Xiaomeng, who was standing beside Zhou Yu, was wearing a little blue dress that was originally not very eye-catching. However, in this gradually darkening environment, the material of the dress began to glow faintly. It was very eye-catching, like a pure little elf that had suddenly appeared in the forest, who knew how many gazes she had attracted. She lowered her head slightly, and her fists that were naturally hanging by her side subconsciously clenched tightly. She was very nervous. Yes, she had someone she liked. She didn't know what that mysterious crown prince was, but she had to help Senator Macklin build a relationship with him, even if it meant sacrificing her own love and life. According to the recent reports, the federal military's hawkish faction had begun to speed up the pace of their preparations for war, and the senators' lobbying in the capital had not been very effective. For the sake of those amiable and respectable companions and people in the 4 mountain estates, she had to do something. She clenched her fists tightly, controlling her impulse to turn around and leave, or to look for Su Lu in the dark. She didn't know why Senator Macklin trusted her so much. No matter how she looked at it, that crown prince on the 2nd floor shouldn't have chosen her, right? Zhang Xiaomeng comforted herself in her heart. Beside them, the girls who had come from afar were also very nervous. Under the sweeping lights, they displayed their slight shyness as they waited. They knew a lot more than the normal girls present, and they knew that the young man on the second floor with the surname C wasn't just the successor of the Xiao Shu Foundation. Although the Xiao Shu Foundation was indeed one of the top private foundations in the Federation, in the face of the Tai family's wealth and power, perhaps it was just a smokescreen that could be casually discarded. In a room shaded by greenery on the second floor, Tai Ziyuan, who was holding a cup of coffee, watched the girls' reactions through the holographic screen with a bored expression. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "It's already the 37th constitutional calendar, and the Federation still has this kind of concubine selection activity. It's really shameful." He didn't have the self-awareness of being the person involved at all, and he expressed his emotions at the scene before him. Beside him, Butler Jean said disapprovingly, "This is a family tradition, and young master should know that there has never been anything involuntary during a coming-of-age ceremony." Tai Ziyuan smiled. When he thought about how the principal had used the words, "the product of love," to introduce him, he felt a little strange. He saw Zhou Yu's face on the holographic screen, and his heart sank slightly. He asked, "Yuzi seems to be in a bad mood today. Did she find out something?" "No." Tai Ziyuan nodded. He was just expressing concern for his friends out of habit. Since Butler Jean said that there was no problem, then there naturally wasn't a problem. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a girl wearing a blue dress. In the darkness, standing beside the red-clothed Zhou Yu, the blue dress was so pure that it instantly made his eyes relax, and he began to feel pity for the girl. Delicate, and moving. Tai Ziyuan stared blankly at the girl. After a long silence, he said softly, "It seems that this girl didn't want to come at all, but now she's standing stubbornly by Yuzi's side. This kind of proud and stubborn temperament, I keep feeling that it's somewhat familiar. I like it very much." Butler Jean calmly reminded him, "Zhang Xiaomeng returned from S2 a year ago, and once did voluntary clerical work in Senator Macklin's office. Although the Federation Investigation Bureau has already determined that she is a returnee and no longer monitoring her, I don't think she's a suitable candidate." "You're wrong. If I like a girl, even if she's from the Empire, I won't mind." Tai Ziyuan coughed softly. He looked at the girl in blue on the holographic screen. Although she appeared calm, her tightly clenched hands had already revealed her nervousness and resistance. A trace of gentleness and complexity flashed across his eyes. He said softly, "It's a pity that I met her a little too late." The violin song was coming to an end. Although Su Lu didn't have any musical knowledge, he could still hear the music. He looked at the movement of the beam of light somewhat indifferently. At this time, the beam of light had already politely swept around the hall. It came to the front of the group of rich girls, and the expressions of those girls became even more nervous. Only Zhou Yu and Zhang Xiaomeng remained calm. Zhou Yu believed that no one in the hall could compete with her, because Lady Tai liked her very much. Zhang Xiaomeng's feelings were so complicated that she forgot to be nervous. Everyone watched the movement of the beam of light nervously. Su Lu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly felt his heart beat faster. Thump, 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 thump. He suddenly had a very bad feeling. He had a feeling that Zhang Xiaomeng had come to this ball just to wait for this moment, and that those two beams of light were going to fall on her. With his heart beating like a drum, Su Lu finally understood that his heart couldn't let go of this blue and pink girl who wore devil horns, and was sometimes like ice and sometimes like fire. He couldn't accept her being someone else's dance partner at the ball. Just as the violin song was about to end, Su Lu suddenly walked out from the corner and strode in Zhang Xiaomeng's direction. However, after taking only 3 steps, Su Li's face was illuminated by a strong beam of light. He subconsciously narrowed his eyes and cursed in his heart. He was very worried that Zhang Xiaomeng, that muddle-headed woman, would really become the dance partner of that sickly Meng Ji Yuan for something that he didn't know about. After a moment, his vision immediately returned to normal. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, but he realized that he could only see darkness. He could only hear extremely shocked cries. This was because he was currently enveloped by the beam of light. Sulu looked around in a daze. He lowered his head and glanced at the expensive GU gown he was wearing. It was shining like the moon under the silver light. For a moment, he didn't know where he was or what had happened. However, the surrounding exclamations and discussions had already exploded like an explosion, mixed with occasional exclamations of disbelief. Yes, no one would have thought that at the end of such a fairy tale-like scene, the object that the beam of light shrouded, was actually a boy. After being shocked, the crowd was in an uproar. Those rich ladies who originally thought that they had high hopes couldn't believe their eyes. A counselor's daughter even fainted from sadness. The lady from the Sun family covered her mouth and looked at the perplexed male student in the middle of the field enveloped by the beam of light. She stuttered, "Could it be that, the Crown Prince, is gay?" Chapter 104. The Federation did not discriminate against homosexuals. In fact, there were already some states in the S3 region that had begun to push for homosexual marriage laws. If the Federation's oldest and most mysterious Tai clan, which had only been passed down for 7 generations, suddenly had a successor with homosexual tendencies, the Federation's president and the other big clans would be so happy that they wouldn't be able to sleep for a few nights. However, other than people like Miss Sun who were so shocked that their thoughts were in a mess, no one would think that the heir of the Tai family was really a homosexual. All the shocked and puzzled gazes were cast on Sulu under the light beam. The exclamations could not be calmed down for a long time. The more people who knew the truth of the ball, the more incredulous they felt. Especially the group of men and women who had come from afar to attend the ball, they could not accept this fact at all. They subconsciously thought that there must be a problem with the lighting control of the central computer. However, the light beam did not move. Su Li's ordinary face was bathed in the silver light, adding a bit of charm to it. Even his puzzled frown looked very attractive. Zhou Yu quietly stared straight at Su Lu in the center of the field. She thought that she was the only one present who knew that Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu knew each other. However, looking at this scene, she knew that although her brother Crown Prince could not be a homosexual, in his eyes, today's ball that she had been preparing for and looking forward to for a long time, was just a farce. How could he be so ridiculous? Her brother Crown Prince did not know how to choose a dance partner. Perhaps he already had one. Even if he wanted to choose, he would not choose her. Zhou Yu's eyes were emotionless. She sadly raised her head and looked in the direction of the second floor. There was no one on the second floor. Her hand that was tightly holding the empty champagne glass trembled. Endless disappointment and exhaustion flooded her heart. The bright red dress on her body was like blood, making her heart palpitate. She felt like she was a big joke. Her fingers suddenly lost strength. The empty champagne glass fell to the ground and broke into countless pieces, never to be put back together again. At the back of the crowd, Shi Qinghai frowned. He retracted his gaze from the champagne glass and looked at Su Lu, who was standing in the middle of the field. He couldn't figure out what had happened. Previously, when Su Lu had rushed out, he had been prepared to watch a good show. He wanted to see how his brother would snatch the Crown Prince's beloved from him. But who would have thought that the strange and mysterious Crown Prince would actually play such a trick? Could it be that Su Lu knew the Crown Prince before? Shi Qinghai's frown deepened as a trace of doubt flashed through his clear eyes. He subconsciously turned his head to look at the uncle next to him, wanting to get some information from the intelligence leader. However, he was surprised to find that the man's face did not show the slightest surprise at all. He just looked at Su Lu gently under the light, as if he had already guessed all of this. "What do you know?" Shi Qinghai lowered his voice and asked coldly, "Did you know that Su Lu and the Crown Prince knew each other, so you wanted to get to know Su Lu through me?" The second leader of the anti-government army smiled slightly and said softly, "The intelligence only said that Su Lu and the Crown Prince had once gone to Hor together. I thought that they should have a good relationship, but I didn't expect the Crown Prince to be so playful as to push your friend out." Shi Qinghai's delicate eyebrows trembled. He suddenly thought of the phone call that Su Lu had given him a few days ago. Could it be that Su Lu had gone to Hor together with the heir of the Tai family that morning because he was heartbroken? Thinking of this, Shi Qinghai was shocked. The person who was even more shocked than Mr. Shi was, without a doubt, Zhang Xiaomeng, who was sitting opposite Su Lu. She covered her mouth tightly and looked at Su Lu, who was bathed in the silver light not far in front of her. She immediately guessed why Su Lu had run to the center of the field just now, but she couldn't understand why the light had enveloped Su Lu. Su Lu didn't understand either, but he knew that the person on the second floor was Tai Ziyuan, so he knew that the light that had lit him up in front of everyone was definitely that guy's doing. He turned his head and was about to find Tai Ziyuan behind the railing on the second floor, so that he could quickly turn off the damn light beam. Growing up, Su Lu was not used to being the center of attention. Furthermore, he was carrying a huge secret on his back. What made him even more uncomfortable was that he did not have wings on his back. How could he float in such a pillar of light? The moment he turned his head, there was another round of exclamations from around the field. He was shocked to find that the dazzling light beam above his head had left him, and was floating towards Zhang Xiaomeng, who was not far from him. The situation suddenly changed. Looking at the light beam moving, the exclamations rose again. Zhang Xiaomeng looked at the light beam moving towards her in disbelief. She subconsciously took a step back with her right foot, wanting to avoid it, but stopped at the last moment. Under the silver light beam, the girl in blue, who was as pure as the sky, instantly occupied everyone's eyes. Su Lu was anxious. He turned around and shouted towards the second floor, Tai Ziyuan, this is mine. There were already too many surprises at Lihua University's Double Moon Festival dance party today. However, in the dreamlike scene under the beam of light, this young male student declared his ownership of a certain girl in front of everyone in a loud and resonant voice, and even a little vulgar. It still surprised everyone, especially when some people remembered that he seemed to have directly criticized the name of the heir of the Xiao Shu Foundation. Tai Ziyuan, who was in front of the screen on the second floor, almost laughed when he heard this loud sentence. However, he restrained his smile and felt a little uncomfortable. He whispered to himself, of course I know it's yours. A calm voice that could silence the listeners rang out in the dance party. This voice sounded very normal, but it seemed to have a trace of magic. In an instant, all the exclamations and discussions in the hall were suppressed, leaving the hall silent. That was Tai Ziyuan's gentle and polite voice. After he expressed his apology, he explained softly. Now standing in the middle of the dance party, standing under the silver light of the two moons, is a friend of mine and the girl he loves. There have been many beautiful stories at the Double Moon Festival dance party, including those of my parents. I hope that at my coming-of-age ceremony, there will also be a beautiful story that will be passed down for many years to come. Please give them a round of applause and blessings. At this point in the story, the people at the dance party thought that they finally understood what had happened. After a moment of silence, warm applause rang out. A small portion of the applause was to praise the generosity of the successor of the Xiao Shu Foundation on the second floor. He had turned his coming-of-age ceremony into a scene of a friend's courtship. However, most of the applause was to bless the couple bathed in the silver moonlight. At this time, Su Lu noticed that the light beam above his head did not disappear. The light beam that moved towards Zhang Xiaomeng was only one of the two lights. At this time, it was late at night. The applause rang out, and the clear light from the transparent dome spilled down. In the dim dance party, only the two lights fell on top of his and Zhang Xiaomeng's heads. It was very eye-catching. Zhang Xiaomeng put down the hand that was on her lips in shock. She watched in disbelief as Su Lu, shrouded in the light, walked step by step toward her. In the eyes of the bystanders, following Su Li's footsteps, the light beam above his head moved as well. It gradually merged with the girl in the blue dress under the moonlight. Just like the two moons in the night sky that were gradually merging into one, it was such a beautiful scene. The applause became louder, and there were a few mischievous whistles in between. Su Lu finally walked in front of Zhang Xiaomeng. He looked at the cute little blue dress on the girl's shoulders and fell silent. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Yes, this beautiful scene at this time was like a dream. It was enough to intoxicate everyone. Su Lu was deeply grateful that Tai Ziyuan had actually arranged such an unexpected scene for him. However, he was a practical person. He always felt that dreams were just dreams, not real life. Zhang Xiaomeng did not say anything. She pursed her lips tightly and looked at him with a trace of stubbornness. In the imagination of every young man and woman for the future and for love, this scene at tonight's dance party was definitely the most beautiful courtship scene. It was not that she had not fantasized about it, but seeing it become reality, her feelings were unusually complicated and strange. She did not know why this dance party suddenly turned out like this. Because of the silence of the male and female leads, the applause gradually subsided. Zhang Xiaomeng lowered her head and said softly, "The person upstairs is called Tai Ziyuan?" He did not expect her first sentence to be like this. Su Li's mood was a little down. He smiled bitterly and said, "Everything was just to get close to him." The two of them spoke very softly. No one could hear them. In the eyes of others, they would probably think that the two of them were whispering sweet words of love. Zhang Xiaomeng slowly raised her head. The moonlight shone on her delicate cheeks, illuminating the slightest detail in her ears. Her delicate and pretty eyes blinked. She suppressed the trace of anger in her heart and asked softly, "Are you his friend? You knew that I wanted to get close to him, so you kept lying to me?" Su Lu frowned and replied, "You kept it from me. I don't know why you wanted to get close to him, and I don't want to know. I just want to know what those days, that night, meant to you." Zhang Xiaomeng's eyes dimmed a little. She knew that Su Lu was telling the truth. She used to think that Su Lu was just a poor and honest student. She never thought that her goal of returning to the university would turn out to be his friend. How did the heir of the Tai family become friends with Su Lu? Her emotions were very complicated. After hearing this sentence, her heart felt like it had been stabbed by a needle. It was extremely painful. "I'm sorry." Zhang Xiaomeng took a deep breath. She felt that things in the world were too ridiculous. Just like the ice-cold daughter of the Zhou family not far behind her, she felt that this ball, especially herself, was a complete joke. Under the silver light of the two moons, the girl was very sad. For the person she believed in, for the person she was willing to sacrifice. She once gave up her love with great heartache. But at the end of the story, she realized that at that time, she did not need to give up anything. This kind of pain made her feel frustrated and helpless. Chapter 105. Not all stories have happy endings. Not every fairy tale ends with a prince and a princess living happily ever after. Today was the double moon festival. Under the two beams of silver moonlight, the man and woman facing each other in silence were not a prince and a princess. Their story was a bit complicated. God had deliberately created obstacles called misunderstandings and coincidences. Most importantly, they were people walking on different paths in life. At this time, they had completely different ideals and goals in life. "I don't know how to dance." After a moment of silence, Su Lu looked at Zhang Xiaomeng's smooth shoulders that were exposed outside of her little dress and stared at the girl's cute collarbone. Suddenly, he thought of the words, "locking autumn," and said, "I don't know your secret, but if you have an important and necessary purpose for approaching the source of danger, perhaps I can help you convey it." "I don't know how to dance either." Zhang Xiaomeng's hands were slightly clenched by her waist. Her voice was a bit light. "And dancing with me will bring you trouble." Su Lu raised his head and looked directly into her eyes. He said calmly, "Just like what I said outside the teaching building that day, I always feel that you like me. If that's the case, why can't we be together? I have my own reasons." Zhang Xiaomeng raised her face slightly. The faint unwillingness and stubbornness on her face were obvious. "I didn't expect things to develop like this. Right now, My heart is in a mess. At this time, if I say anything to you, if I ask anything of you, it will always make me feel like I'm using you, and I don't like this feeling. Sulu didn't understand this sentence, but his heart naturally felt a bit heavy. After a moment, he said, when you want to tell me your secret, please contact me. I'm always available. Zhang Xiaomeng bowed slightly to him and said softly, maybe that day won't come. I'm sorry. You've already said sorry too many times in the past few days. Su Li's eyes narrowed with some annoyance. He said, I don't like to hear it. Okay. Zhang Xiaomeng suddenly puffed up her cheeks and laughed, looking very cute. She tilted her head and winked at him, saying, since none of you know how to dance, then I'll leave first. However, Su Lu could see the sadness in the girl's heart from her cute and clean appearance. His heart sank as he watched Zhang Xiaomeng turn around and walk towards the exit of the ball. There was another uproar in the ballroom. Everyone's eyes followed Zhang Xiaomeng's departure. The beam of light also followed Zhang Xiaomeng's departure. Everyone thought that this would be another romantic story that would be remembered for many years in the history of Yue University's Double Moon Festival. However, no one expected that the female lead of the story would leave silently. Looking at the girl in blue who was gradually moving away with the beam of light, the people who were watching this scene felt as if they were watching a stage play in the capital's Gothic theater. Naturally, there was an indescribable faint sadness in their hearts. Su Lu silently looked at Zhang Xiaomeng's back. After a moment, he decisively turned around and left in the opposite direction. The beam of light above his head was still enveloping him, moving with his lonely back. If the previous beam of light was incomparably romantic, then the current beam of light was particularly glaring. Su Lu was a little depressed. He looked up at the beam of light above his head and suddenly said, it's not like we're filming a tragedy. What's the point of creating an atmosphere? There was something wrong with this sentence. There was a kind of anger hidden under the calm. The beam of light seemed to feel fear and instantly extinguished. The entire ballroom was plunged into darkness. Only the bright full moon that was tens of thousands of kilometers away shone down on them. The lights came back on, and the beautiful dance music started again. Yue University's Double Moon Festival dance continued. The waiters respectfully walked through the ballroom with wine glasses and food. However, the atmosphere was a little awkward. It was difficult to return to the lively and happy mood from before. Some people had already left. Zhang Xiaomeng left alone. Zhou Yu left with a sad expression. Even the group of rich kids from the capital left the ballroom silently. In their eyes, the behavior of the Tai family's heir was an authentic farce. Of course, he had the right to do so. However, they were not in a good mood, especially when they thought about what happened after they came to Linhai. Before these people left, they coldly looked at Su Li's back. Life still had to go on, especially for the ordinary young people of the Federation. The highlight of the ballroom did not have a happy ending, but their love still had to ferment under the moonlight. Accompanied by the melodious dance music, the atmosphere gradually became lively. Many couples walked onto the dance floor and began to dance. Shi Qinghai, who had disappeared for a moment, returned to his original position. He calmly looked at Su Lu, who was walking towards him, and said in an extremely low voice, the 12 special agents of the Special Task Force are outside the building. The ones inside the building should be the Tai family's own bodyguards. The middle-aged man beside him looked at Su Lu, who was getting closer and closer, and smiled slightly. This spy leader of the anti-government forces trusted Old Eagle's ability and was not worried about his own safety. Instead, he brought up another topic. I suddenly thought of something. If Zhou Yu had succumbed to your threat, and if this hadn't happened so suddenly, would it have been Zhang Xiaomeng who went up to the second floor? I'm not used to evaluating the abilities of amateurs. Shi Qinghai looked straight ahead with a calm expression. No, I admire Comrade Medellin's arrangements. The middle-aged man smiled and said, the more amateurish you are, the easier it is to succeed. It's getting harder and harder for professionals like you to survive. Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and did not answer. He patted Su Li's shoulders as a gesture of consolation. The middle-aged man looked at Su Lu and smiled. At this moment, a waiter came in front of the three of them and very politely invited Su Li in the doorway of a room on the second floor. Su Lu looked at the middle-aged man beside him in surprise and asked, "Uncle, when did you come up?" The waiter maintained his calm and politeness. He was only sending out the invitation on behalf of the young master. As for how those ugly middle-aged men came up, that was something that needed to be filtered by the security department. It was not part of his job scope. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "No one stopped me. Besides, didn't you just promise me that as long as you went up to the second floor, you would take me with you?" These words were obviously not true. The Double Moon Festival Ball seemed to be lax in security, but in reality, to go from the first floor to the second floor, who knew how many steps one had to go through? Although Su Lu was covering for them, this middle-aged man's ability was too frightening. At this moment, the door opened. Su Lu shrugged indifferently. Under the guidance of the waiter, he walked in with this strange uncle beside him. This was a very large suite. The floor was covered with a woolen carpet. The furnishings around were quite ancient. There was not much of a modern electronic style. A curtain, a lamp, they all looked very elegant. In the deepest part of the suite, on a huge sofa, sat a young man with a slightly pale complexion. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call him a teenager, because every time Su Lu saw him, he always felt that his body was very weak, and his figure was somewhat thin. "Thank you." Suddenly knowing the real identity of the teenager in front of him, although it was far from his real identity, Su Lu still felt like there was a door between him and Tai Ziyuan. He found it hard to get used to it. His voice was slightly dry as he said, "I didn't expect you to give me such a big surprise." Tai Ziyuan obviously guessed Su Li's reaction after seeing him. He smiled slightly, pointed to a chair beside him and said, "Sit, don't be so reserved." It was very strange. This kind of tone was usually used by a superior to a subordinate, but when it was spoken by Tai Ziyuan, it sounded so natural. Su Lu frowned slightly. He was not used to it and also felt a little uncomfortable, but he still sat on a chair beside the sofa. The room was silent. The two of them did not seem to know what topic to talk about. After all, they used to talk most of the time through the communicator and that piece of paper. Even after they finally met, they did not have much time to talk like ordinary people. Su Lu did not know what the Xiu Shu Foundation was, nor did he know what the Tai family represented in the Federation. He did not know Tai Ziyuan's history, but he felt that the Tai Ziyuan on the sofa at this moment was not the same person as the Tai Ziyuan he usually knew at night. At night, Tai Ziyuan was an ordinary young man who was a little proud, a little cold, and a little bored. But at this moment, Tai Ziyuan was like a monster who was born with a certain kind of aura. In this silence, the only exception was the middle-aged man who followed Su Lu into the room. The middle-aged man had his hands behind his back, and like a tourist, he stared at the small decorations in the room with interest. It seemed that he did not want to participate in this conversation at all. Butler Jean, who had been standing silently beside the sofa, stared at the middle-aged man with a complicated expression. He suddenly said, "Student Su, who is this?" Su Lu was stunned. He smiled embarrassedly and introduced the middle-aged man to Tai Ziyuan and Butler Jean. "This is my friend's uncle. He asked me to take him to the second floor. I didn't know you were upstairs at that time, so I just casually agreed. I didn't expect that this old man would actually follow us up." "Just because you don't know doesn't mean that everyone doesn't know." Tai Ziyuan glanced at the middle-aged man and said with a smile, "Would you like to sit down and have a chat?" You guys chat first. "I'm not in a hurry." The second in command of the anti-government forces waved his hand with a smile, completely unaware that he was in danger. Strangely enough, after he said that, Tai Ziyuan really did not care about him anymore. He just let the middle-aged man wander around his room. He turned his head and looked at Sulu with a gentle smile and said, "Let's get to know each other again." "Sulu, I'm Tai Ziyuan." The atmosphere in the room finally relaxed. Sulu said with a smile, "Of course I know. I also guessed that your family must be rich, but I didn't expect it to be to this extent. I've heard of the Cultivation Foundation. But I think, you definitely don't know my real identity." Tai Ziyuan looked at him and said calmly, "The Cultivation Foundation is just something for ordinary people to see. My family and some other rich and idle families gathered together. The people of the Federation gave us a name, something called the Seven Great Families. I think you've heard of it before." Sulu listened to this sentence in shock. He suddenly remembered that he had found the surname Yi familiar a long time ago. He asked in disbelief, "Is it the Tai family whose ancestors were emperors?" Not many people still remember things that happened tens of thousands of years ago. "Looks like you're pretty good at history," Tai Ziyuan said with a smile. Chapter 106. Since the 37th constitutional era, the Federation had already undergone many political structural reforms. Although there were not many changes in essence, there would always be a distinction between the old and the new. The last major reform in the Federation had occurred over 600 years ago. People were also used to calling the recent Federation the New Federation. However, regardless of whether it was in the history textbooks of the new or old Federation schools, the description of the history of human civilization before the constitutional era was always rather vague. Perhaps it was because it was too long ago and there was no detailed historical information. Perhaps it was because the Federation's educators believed that the citizens, who were bathed in the glory of democracy and freedom, should look more toward the beautiful future and not reminisce about the imperial era that was actually not beautiful due to the aesthetic illusion created by the difference in time. It was precisely because of this reason that, other than those specialized historians, there were not many Federation citizens who still cared about the imperial society from tens of thousands of years ago. Although the history textbooks had taught these things, not many people could remember that the last imperial family had the surname Yun. Therefore, when Sulu blurted out the origins of the Tai family, Tai Ziyuan could not help but be a little surprised. He smiled and praised his historical knowledge. Sulu was immersed in shock and did not hear the others' praise. He only subconsciously recalled those years in the Donglin region, those days when Uncle Fengyu had made him soak in the library and read books every day. The history of the imperial court was too long ago. However, the seven great families of the Federation were deeply engraved in the minds of all Federation citizens. Even though Sulu had been far away in the remote Donglin region back then, he still knew that the Federation had seven extremely influential families. These families' industries were distributed in various areas of the Federation, secretly influencing the entire Federation's energy development, finance, welfare, and employment. No matter how the president of the Federation changed or how the election of members of parliament was repeated, it would not affect the status of these seven great families in the Federation. Just like a certain proverb said, the Federation is the seven great families. Perhaps this sentence was a bit exaggerated, but no one could ignore the shadows of these seven families in the history of the Federation civilization. The most frightening thing was that no one knew how large the shadows of these seven families were. In the early years of the constitutional era, every once in a while, the Federation government would have a president or a powerful management committee that was deeply trusted by the people. These political figures would always try to, with the support of the people and the media, completely separate the Federation from the influence of the seven families. However, no matter what kind of laws and presidential orders those successful presidents and powerful management committees passed, it was still impossible to find out the true strength of the seven families. The Citizens' Property Declaration Act, the Corporations Property Transparency Act, the Anti-Monopoly Law, the Anti-Monopoly Law Amendment Bill. Countless laws and regulations did not play their role in the face of the silence of these families. The Federation of that era was equivalent to a battlefield where the government and the seven families fought desperately. 3 presidents were killed by assassinations, and the truth was still not found out. Under the strict control of the government, the 7 families also lost a lot of benefits. It was said that one family almost lost its inheritance and was destroyed. However, apart from the bloodshed, in the eyes of historians, the life and death struggles of those years were not necessarily without any benefits. The federal government's control of the 7 major families had, to a large extent, perfected the legal structure of the federation, and the 7 major families' counteraction against the federal government had also prevented the emergence of an overly powerful government. As the era progressed, the 7 families were part of the federation and could not fight like this forever. The huge industries hidden in the society of the 7 families could only be sustained in a relatively long-term and stable social structure. They could not openly choose to stand on the opposite side of the government and the people. And those politicians who needed votes also began to realize that if they could obtain the support of the 7 families, then their future political path would be very smooth. Both sides had needs, so under the subtle influence of benefits, the federation began to develop in a different direction. The politicians began to secretly seek the help of the 7 families, and the 7 families began to choose their own political partners, using the family's own strength to help these partners obtain the votes of the citizens of the federation. They could only be partners, and the politicians could not completely become the spokespersons of the 7 families. Because the politicians who lost the necessity of their independent existence would inevitably yield to the pressure of the 7 families, and the natural desire of the 7 families' huge wealth would turn these politicians into their tools for profit, which would inevitably violate the rights and interests of the majority of ordinary citizens in the short term. The social unrest that followed was a terrible result that anyone with foresight in the Federation, and even the 7 families themselves, did not want to see. This was an instinctive choice to live together, but to forcibly suppress these collusion within the bottom line that the Federation citizens could bear. And because of the tacit understanding between the Federation government and the 7 families that had never been seen on paper, the 7 families had always maintained a somewhat mysterious and lofty image in the hearts of the Federation citizens. The human heart had always had a natural desire for the strong, and the existence of the 7 families just so happened to satisfy this psychological need of the Federation citizens, just so happened to offset some of the citizens' dissatisfaction with certain unfairness in society. It had to be said that the media played a very important role in this. Whether or not the mysterious and lofty 7 families had done anything that specifically harmed ordinary citizens, no one knew, right? All of this only changed slightly with the appearance of the scholar George Carlin. The anti-government forces that had bitterly held on in the S2 mountains suddenly found a political program that was more suitable for the needs of the Federation citizens. They pointed the spearhead of their struggle at the relationship between the Federation government and the 7 families, and from George Carlin's teachings, they put forward the part that they needed the most. They demanded that the politicians of the Federation and the 7 families that were never willing to appear in front of the Federation citizens return the wealth that had been exploited from the hands of ordinary citizens for countless years. They demanded that the 7 families must pay the true price for the damage they had done to the democracy and freedom of the Federation throughout history. The anti-government forces gradually gave up on the use of force. The moderate faction led by Senator Macklin held the banner of George Carlin and successfully influenced the 4 mountainous regions of the S2 region, and set off a huge wave in the hearts of the young Federation citizens. However, this was still not enough to threaten the status of the 7 great families in the Federation. These 7 families were even very happy to see the existence of Senator Macklin. This was because as long as any conflict entered the path of an election, it was a process that could be controlled, influenced, or at least negotiated. As for the thoughts that were prevalent among the young people, the 7 families weren't afraid of them. Young people were always hot-blooded. When they left school and entered society, they entered various companies and government departments. They naturally understood how difficult and unrewarding it was to vainly go against the historical traditions of the Federation. The 7 great families had existed coldly and tyrannically every day since the birth of the Federation. Furthermore, they had grown stronger with each passing day. If someone were to say that they had already controlled most of the lifelines of the Federation, it would not be considered an exaggeration. Moreover, it seemed that they would continue to exist until the day the Federation came to an end. This fact couldn't help but shock people. The reason why the 7 families were so mysterious was because the lives of the truly important people had never appeared in any news or documentary. They only existed in imagination and on the Federation's television channels, and only existed in Evergreen City's film reels. There was also no scholar or government organization that could truly investigate which family controlled which part of the Federation's industry. There was only one exception, and that was the Zhong family of the West Woods. Because the Zhong family's 4th military region had guarded the edge of the universe for generations for the Federation, it had long been exposed to the public due to an accident at the beginning of the first constitutional era. It couldn't hide its enormous figure. On the contrary, the names of the 7 families weren't much of a secret. Even Su Lu could easily name the inherited surnames of 6 of the families. Among the 7 families, there was only one family that was truly low-key and mysterious, and that was the Tai family. Not many people knew that this Tai family was actually the descendant of the royal family that ruled the entire human society a long time ago. When Su Lu heard Tai Ziyuan admit that he was the successor of the Tai family, he couldn't help but be momentarily stunned. For a long time, he couldn't speak. This identity wasn't the son of a rich family or the son of a politician. Instead, it represented a kind of history, a kind of omnipresent influence. The successor of the 7 families, if placed in ancient times, would at least be considered a king. After being in shock for so long, Su Lu slowly came back to his senses. The first thing he thought of was a question. He stared blankly at the pale youth on the sofa and muttered, "Why did you tell me? Why did Tai Ziyuan tell him his true identity?" This was Su Li's first question after he recovered from the shock. If the other party was the bright moon hanging high in the night sky, then he was at most an inconspicuous osmanthus tree by the Rose River. The two of them were not people of the same world. Even if they had gotten along like ordinary friends a few days ago, once the other party's identity was revealed, it was like a gap between the two of them, and no matter what, it was impossible to fill the gap. "You're a very good friend." From the moment Tai Ziyuan revealed his identity, he had been calmly and attentively observing Su Li's expression. He was very satisfied that he didn't see any reaction in Su Li's eyes that he didn't like. He admired this friend of his even more for being able to recover from the shock so quickly and talk to him like a normal person. "I used to have friends, but after they knew my identity, they didn't have the courage to get along with me like friends. They either left quietly or became people like Yuzi. I think if we continue to be friends, one day, you will also face this dilemma." Tai Ziyuan smiled gently and said, "If that's the case, I might as well tell you in advance." The reason why Su Lu recovered so quickly was because of his experience over the years. Chapter 107. You can't blame others for this sort of thing. After hearing Tai Ziyuan's sigh, Su Lu was rather disapproving. After a moment of silence, he decided to voice his own opinion. "You are the heir of the 7 great families. Compared to us commoners, you are born from 2 different worlds. Perhaps you yourself have never noticed it. No matter how much you pretend to be gentle, as long as you are in front of others, for example, right now, you will always naturally reveal some sort of aura." Tai Ziyuan looked at him with interest and asked, "What kind of aura?" "I can't say for sure." Su Lu laughed bitterly. "In any case, it's not something I like very much. Perhaps it's a little too calm, as if everything in the world is within your grasp. Perhaps the people around you are already used to you being like this, but when I first met you, you were just an ordinary student with some money, so I'm not used to it." After hearing this, Tai Ziyuan could not help but laugh and say, "I never thought that in your eyes, I would actually be so unbearable." Su Lu explained, "It's not unbearable, it's just not used to it." Tai Ziyuan was silent for a moment, and then said seriously, "What you say makes sense. I shouldn't ask for too much. This world has never been fair. Some people are born with more resources and power than others, like me. I won't pretentiously say that this is a kind of distress, because, other than me, everyone seems to want to have this kind of distress but can't. He looked at Su Li's ordinary and amiable face and said calmly, "Let's talk about something else. Did you have fun in the combat room this morning?" Changing the topic to talk about the black mecha walking around with its belly full, Su Li's mood finally relaxed a little, no longer treating the youth on the sofa as some sort of monster. He scratched his head and said sincerely, "Thank you for covering for me. To survive in this society, you need a lot of opportunities. Not everyone can encounter a chance to shine. You saw it this morning, but you ran away like you were scared of a ghost." Tai Ziyuan shook his head and disagreed. "I don't know why you don't want to be famous. This is really not like a normal young man." Su Lu thought to himself, "I have my troubles, just like you have your troubles. How do I explain this? Am I supposed to tell you that I am a fugitive from the Federation who is assisting traitors?" In order to hide the complicated emotions in his heart, he narrowed his eyes and smiled. Naturally, he changed the topic. "I've already thanked you before, and now I want to thank you again. After all, it's your coming-of-age ceremony, and you've helped me so much. Oh, when it comes to matters between men and women, no matter how much I help you, that Miss Xiaomeng will ignore you. It's useless." Tai Ziyuan looked at him with a faint smile and said, "As for the coming-of-age ceremony, you have already taken me there dozens of hours ago. Today, these should be my return gift to you." As he spoke, Tai Ziyuan took out a red envelope from his pocket and bitterly smiled. "See this? This is the red envelope given to me by the girl in Star Clubhouse." Su Lu saw the red envelope in his hand and forcibly suppressed his laughter. He felt that this matter was extremely ridiculous, but for some reason, he actually felt a little proud. The two heirs of the 7 major families of the Federation, one was raised by him for a few days, and the other was taken by him to lose her virginity. If this were to be made into a TV series, it would probably break Channel 23's ratings record. It had to be said that Tai Ziyuan was a person who was very good at controlling the rhythm of the conversation and the atmosphere. Under this red envelope, the sensitive attitude of the two young people gradually disappeared, and the two people's sitting posture also became much more relaxed. "In addition to the clubhouse, I also want to thank you for the pancakes and porridge you brought me these past few nights. Thinking about it this way, as the heir of the Tai family, you seem to be a little too stingy." Su Lu was also in the mood to joke. "Even more stingy than that A-list girl. At least she gave you a red envelope, but you only gave me 2 lights." As he said this, his gaze became suspicious, because he saw Tai Ziyuan smile and hand him a piece of paper. When he took a look, Su Li's expression changed a little. He looked at Tai Ziyuan in surprise. "Jian Shue'er's concert tickets? Why haven't I heard of this before?" Next week, Jian Shue'er will release her first solo album. Tai Ziyuan retracted his hand and looked at him with a smile. With her influence in the Federation, she will hold a celebration concert in about a month, and in fact, she has already booked the time and location of the concert. "I know you're infatuated with this girl. Is this gift of thanks comparable to those overnight pancakes you bought?" Su Lu pretended not to hear the mischievous meaning in the other party's words and scratched his head in disbelief. Probably only the heir of one of the 7 major families could get a VIP ticket when Jian Shue'er's concert was still in preparation. For Su Lu, Jian Shue'er was not as simple as an idol. To him, the face of the purple-haired girl who appeared on Channel 23 every night represented the company he had all these years, the years he was no longer lonely, the memories he had in Donglin district, the demonstrations on Gula Street. Looking at the thin ticket in his hand, Su Lu was stunned for a moment, thinking that he would see Jian Shue'er with his own eyes in a month's time. He did not react for a long time. "Ah. I actually never wanted to see Jian Shue'er." Su Lu was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He was not a groupie, and Jian Shue'er was a very symbolic figure to him. He would rather keep a distance and watch from afar. But even so, he still carefully put the ticket into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "But thank you anyway." Su Lu looked at the familiar yet unfamiliar Tai Ziyuan on the sofa and said, "You didn't have to do this." Tai Ziyuan sat on the sofa, holding a cup of coffee and drinking it tastelessly. After Su Lu left, he suddenly felt that there was nothing for him to do. The Double Moon Festival ball was meaningless to him. He knew very well what he should do and what he should do. That young man named Su Lu could not be considered his true friend yet. He had always doubted whether he would ever have a true friend in this lifetime. If Su Li's appearance in his life was an accident, Tai Ziyuan did not reject this kind of accident. In fact, he was willing to let this kind of accident exist for a while longer. After meeting this interesting and poor student for the past few days, Tai Ziyuan was also very surprised that he could actually get along and talk to him like a normal person. But what would happen after his identity was exposed? Tai Ziyuan's eyes were very sharp. From the details of the past few days, he could confirm that Su Lu was a trustworthy and sincere person. It was just that his personality seemed to be a little too stubborn. Moreover, Tai Ziyuan increasingly found that Su Lu was actually a very capable person. It was just that this guy always intentionally or unintentionally hid some aspects of his abilities. Tai Ziyuan admired Su Li's character and ability. He even had the idea of including this young man in the family, watching him grow up, and recruiting him as a capable subordinate in the future. However, after today's conversation, he keenly noticed Su Li's natural resistance to certain possibilities. Although the two sides did not say it explicitly, it was already revealed in their words and expressions. When Su Lu left, he asked where you were. I told him that you had already left. Tai Ziyuan stopped thinking about those things and returned to his usual calmness. He looked at the middle-aged man who came out from behind the bookcase and said, "There's no one else here, so I think it's time for me to introduce myself." The middle-aged man who had followed Su Lu to the second floor seemed to have disappeared during the conversation. He walked in front of Tai Ziyuan and, without waiting for instructions from the host, casually sat down on the sofa opposite him. He looked at the young man and said with a smile, "A lot of people are looking for you, but I still beat them to it." Butler Jean handed a cup of coffee to the mysterious middle-aged man and then retreated behind Tai Ziyuan in silence. Tai Ziyuan gently used a silver spoon to stroke the black coffee in his cup and said, "Since I've already revealed my identity, I know that a lot of people are looking for me. But I also know that Su Lu only has 3 friends, and whether it's Zhang Xiaomeng or Shi Qinghai's uncle, they shouldn't have appeared at the ball. Even if they did, they wouldn't have snuck up with Su Lu so easily. Of course, I don't have an uncle who's a secret agent. You should know that on the way upstairs, you could die at any time." Tai Ziyuan raised his head and looked calmly at the middle-aged man opposite him. "But you're not afraid at all, and you don't have a weapon on you. So I'm willing to give you, an adventurer, a chance to talk to me. But you have to tell me your name first. After all, I don't want my first negotiation partner to be a guy who's deliberately mystifying." Under that pair of pressurizing eyes, the middle-aged man didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy. He took a sip of his coffee and said, "I'm very grateful that you didn't just kill me earlier. Instead, you gave me a chance to speak. I'm from the mountains." The middle-aged man put down his coffee cup and looked calmly at the teenager on the sofa. "I hope I didn't surprise you." Ing Ziyuan fell silent upon hearing this. Behind him, Butler Jean narrowed his eyes, and a cold aura gradually seeped out of him. The Federation's privileged class had always been at odds with the anti-government forces in the mountains. So, this guy was actually from the mountains? After a moment of thought, Tai Ziyuan's lips curled into a smile. He asked, "I think you should know that my mother has already rejected Senator Macklin's request for an audience. The leader of Nanshui shouldn't allow someone who can't promise anything to have this conversation. So, it seems that your position in the mountains isn't bad. Senator Macklin hasn't been in the mountains for many years." The middle-aged man very naturally explained Tai Ziyuan's question. "What's your ranking in the mountains?" Tai Ziyuan frowned slightly as he stared at the middle-aged man's abnormally wretched face. "I directly assist Senator Nanshui in his work." The middle-aged man said seriously, "So, I have the qualifications to act on his behalf." No matter how calm Tai Ziyuan was, after hearing this answer, his pupils couldn't help but shrink. Behind him, Butler Jean was even more regretful. If he had known this person's true identity earlier, he definitely wouldn't have let the young master take such a risk to meet with this person. Chapter 108. To be able to meet the heir of the most mysterious and oldest family in the Federation, and to be able to meet such a young heir who is full of courage and judgment, this is my honor. The middle-aged man didn't seem to have the aura of the anti-government forces in the mountains. Instead, he was like a businessman who gently expressed his respect for the Tai family. I didn't expect you anti-government forces to flatter like the politicians in the Federation, Tai Ziyuan said with slight sarcasm. If it can make you feel better, I don't mind flattering you even louder. Tai Ziyuan looked at the second-in-command of the anti-government forces not far in front of him. He gradually compared the image with the image in the information, but he found that the two images didn't match. No matter if it's the Federation or your organization, it seems that you only have one code name, and that is, him. He gradually calmed down and said, but in a conversation, there is always a need for a name. Child Tai, you can call me a mountain man, the middle-aged man said. Tai Ziyuan calmly but firmly shook his head. I don't like this kind of literary name. The middle-aged man smiled and said, then you can call me Zhongsai. Okay, Mr. Zhongsai, I don't want to say things like how stupid you are. You should know better than me how many people in the Federation want you dead. Tai Ziyuan knew that he wasn't facing an ordinary person, but a very troublesome and powerful figure in the Federation. Moreover, this was the first time in his adult life that he truly represented the Tai family in a conversation with the major forces as the heir of the Tai family. Therefore, he was very cautious and said a few more words to buy time for himself to calm down. Please tell me your intention directly. He stared at the middle-aged man's ugly triangular eyes and asked directly. I come with the request of the 70,000 soldiers in the mountains, the hope of the 13 million citizens of the Federation in the mountains, and the trust of Comrade Nanshui. The middle-aged man's tone was very serious at this moment. I come with the intention of peace, and I hope to get a response from the Federation. Peace. This was such a familiar yet strange word. This was especially true for the conflict between the Federation government and the anti-government army. How many years had it been since the anti-government army fought in the 4 prefectures? Although the military had gradually faded in the past 2 decades, the upper echelons of the Federation knew that the foundation of the anti-government forces was still above their military strength. Both sides had been fighting back for countless years, and countless people had been sacrificed. Blood had dyed every inch of the mountain red. Peace. Tai Ziyuan's fingers that were stirring the coffee instantly stiffened. A strange expression gradually appeared on his pale face. He had never thought that the second-in-command of the anti-government army would go straight to the point and actually throw out such a heavyweight bomb. The peace negotiations between the Federation government and the anti-government forces had gone through countless rounds and produced countless peace agreements. However, in the end, due to the betrayal of one party or the outbreak of an unexpected incident, the paper agreement would be put to rest. Even though the moderate faction of the anti-government forces had long ascended onto the Federation's political stage and began to seek the support of the voters with a non-violent image, in reality, in those areas outside of the media's reach, the armed conflict between the government and anti-government forces had always continued. If this was a normal peace negotiation, Tai Ziyuan definitely wouldn't be so shocked. However, since the person in front of him was the second-in-command of the anti-government forces, a core strength that was deeply trusted by Nanshui, the peace he spoke of was naturally not the peace on paper. It was a real peace that could be implemented. You should contact the President's office or the Ministry of Defense directly. Tai Ziyuan took a deep breath and suppressed the faint excitement in his heart. He calmly said, if you are truly willing to return the Federation to a period of peace without civil war, I will represent the Tai family to express a 120% welcome and immediately provide full support to the 4 prefectures. These words were said beautifully, but in reality, they were equivalent to not saying anything. The peace negotiations between the government and the anti-government forces should have been left to the politicians and professional soldiers to negotiate. Tai Ziyuan didn't have the urge to participate. He knew that admittedly, this could bring him abundant political capital and a good reputation among the citizens. However, this was a matter that was destined to be complicated and extremely risky. If he wasn't careful, it could become a black hole that swallowed everything. Young Master Tai must be joking. If I could talk to the president of the Federation or those soldiers, I naturally wouldn't come to find you, the middle-aged man said calmly. The middle-aged man replied calmly, the federal government is used to going back on their word. If we really put down the guns in our hands and stop the roaring of the armored vehicles' engines, perhaps the next day, countless mechas and planes will begin to attack the mountainous area. Then you still shouldn't have come to find me. Tai Ziyuan said as calmly as he could. I am just a young man who is still studying. You can't expect me to do anything. But everyone in the major factions wants to get in touch with you at this time, because everyone knows that after the coming-of-age ceremony, Lady Tai will gradually return the family business to your hands, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Moreover, Lady Tai is not that easy to meet. I am not Senator Macklin. I am someone who is still on the Federation's war criminal list. If I dare to reveal my identity and ask to meet her in the capital special region, I'm sure that after 3 minutes, countless soldiers will begin to hunt me down. That's right. It's always easier to meet a student like me. Tai Ziyuan said, but the problem is, although I just completed the coming-of-age ceremony, according to the family rules, I can't immediately decide all the family affairs. I believe that Lady Tai will gradually transfer the decision-making power to your hands, the middle-aged man said calmly. The mysterious Tai family has kept a low profile for countless years. Although they still haven't announced your coming-of-age ceremony this year, those who have gradually come to Yue University have proven that Lady Tai has no intention of continuing to hide your existence from the public. If my guess is correct, after you finish your studies at Yue University, you will enter the military. Perhaps you will even go to the front lines in the West Woods to accumulate military merits. After that, you will begin to enter the government and begin to work as a government official. About 10 years later, you will begin to enter the political world to prepare for that final goal. Final goal? Tai Ziyuan's eyes narrowed. He realized once again that this extremely mysterious man in the Federation's files was indeed not someone who could be easily controlled. At the very least, this man had an extremely powerful intelligence system and analytical ability. This ability in itself was enough to shock people. Other than the president, when the great Tai family steps out into the open for the first time, what kind of role play on the stage would you be interested in? The middle-aged man said with a smile. But that is a matter for many years to come. What we are talking about now is something that will happen soon. Speaking of what would happen soon, this middle-aged man's tone became much more serious and cautious. The federal military has been preparing for a military invasion of the mountainous region. This has made Comrade Nanshui and I feel an unprecedented pressure. The Federation's successive embargoes and sanctions have caused the resources in the mountainous region to be extremely scarce. Even if the citizens of the Federation who sympathize with you want to continue the secret donations from the past few years, due to the lack of channels, they are unable to send the donations to you. Furthermore, due to the existence of Senator Macklin, your base of support from the people in the 4 states surrounding the mountainous region has been greatly divided. Tai Ziyuan easily pointed out the predicament that the anti-government forces were in. The people who support you are becoming fewer and fewer. Is that why you have thought of the word peace? The times are stronger than the people. A trace of vicissitudes of life flashed across the middle-aged man's face. That is why I have come with sincerity to seek a response from your family. I still don't understand. Tai Ziyuan didn't feel the slightest bit uneasy just because the other party had exposed his family's future plans for his political future. He said coldly, even if I am already able to make decisions within the family, but what does this have to do with the peace negotiations between you anti-government forces and the government? I have never denied the family's influence on the Federation's politics, but I have never been arrogant enough to think that I can change the attitude of the entire Federation government. But you can try to change the attitude of the Federation president. The middle-aged man looked at Tai Ziyuan and said with a smile, "Next year is the presidential election. I know that Senator Pabre has already met with the madam." Tai Ziyuan raised his coffee cup, but he didn't drink it. He was deep in thought for a long time. This head of intelligence of the anti-government forces had once again proven to him the valiant power of the intelligence network under his command. The middle-aged man didn't shut up because of Tai Ziyuan's silence. He continued his analysis calmly. "So, there are a few reasons why I have to take the risk to come here and talk to you. First, compared to the current Federation president and government, we, the anti-government forces, trust Senator Pabre's moral standards more. Secondly, although Councilman Powerb had a good reputation among the middle and lower-class citizens of the Federation, for the capital ring, and especially for S1, which had the most voters, this lawyer who was born in the family of Donglin miners, was still a somewhat unfamiliar face. He needs an explosive news event to help him gain the approval of the majority of S1 voters in the shortest amount of time. Third, Senator Pabre has no military experience. He has never shown the courage and determination to deal with unexpected situations. His ability in the field of national security has always been widely doubted. During the election, this will undoubtedly become a weakness for his election opponents to attack. So, we hope that the Tai family can help us, so that we can directly negotiate a grand reconciliation agreement with Senator Pabre." The middle-aged man continued slowly. "We trust the Tai family's demeanor and Senator Pabre's political ethics. Once the agreement is reached, Senator Pabre will also gain wonderful political capital from it, thus ensuring his success in next year's presidential election." It had to be said that this intelligence leader of the anti-government forces was also an excellent lobbyist. At this moment, Tai Ziyuan admitted that he was a little tempted, but at the same time, he became more vigilant. This guy from the anti-government forces was actually more experienced than those professional brokers outside of the capital city management committee. This kind of person really couldn't be taken lightly. "What kind of conditions do you want?" Tai Ziyuan asked calmly. "Before Pabre becomes president, we will begin negotiations. During the negotiations, can the federal military gather troops take a break first? At the same time, the Federation government's economic blockade, can we privately open a gap?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "After Senator Pabre becomes president, naturally, everything can be discussed." Chapter 109. The long silence proved that this request made by the anti-government army was an extremely attractive exchange condition for the Tai family, for Tai Ziyuan, and for Representative Pabre, whom he and his mother had already decided to support. Tai Ziyuan knew very well that if it weren't for the complicated political environment of the four mountain estates, as well as the increasing military pressure of the hawkish figures in the Federation, the anti-government army led by the leader of Nan Shui definitely wouldn't have taken the initiative to ask for peace. However, he had to admit that even so, the anti-government army still had enough bargaining chips to exchange for the corresponding conditions. During the early stages of the election, Representative Pabre cannot influence the internal decisions of the Federation government. Tai Ziyuan broke the silence and reminded the other party. "Pabre can't, but public opinion can. The Tai family's secret influence can," the middle-aged man said calmly. "If the citizens of the Federation knew that the presidential candidate Representative Pabre is taking a huge political risk to negotiate peace with us, the ruthless anti-government army, and at this time, the Federation government went against the flow and forcefully launched a military attack against us, they will definitely issue the strongest rebuke to the Federation government. I admit that what you said makes sense. This kind of exchange of benefits is indeed very attractive." After a moment of silence, Tai Ziyuan said, "But I can't answer your request immediately. Please give me some time. I can't stay in the Federation's core area for too long. You should know that." The middle-aged man smiled and said, although the Bureau of Proclamation won't care about me, I still respect the hounds of the Federation and the spiders of the Federation Bureau of Investigation. If I stay in the Federation for too long, I might be underestimating them. Tai Ziyuan pushed the coffee cup aside and said with a smile, since you've already taken the risk to come here, why can't you take the risk and wait for a few more hours? The reason I dared to take the risk and come here today is because I know that no one in the Federation government would guess that I dared to take such a risk. The middle-aged man said calmly, if you stay too long, it's not a risk, it's a fool. Then how should I contact you? With your ability, it should be easy for you to find out how I came in. When the time comes, I'll ask you to pass on the final decision to that young man. The corners of Tai Ziyuan's lips curled up slightly, and he said with a smile, this way, I still have to guarantee that young man's safety within the Federation's borders. Mr. Butsai, your considerations have never left anything out. No, I don't even know how much time I have left to run for my life after going down from the second floor, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Tai Ziyuan quietly stared into his eyes, as if he wanted to discern what the other party had guessed from his words, or if it was just a habitual joke. A moment later, he looked at the other party and said seriously, your considerations are not bad. The exchange of benefits is indeed what I value, but what I value even more is the Federation's future. If I have the chance to capture you and kill you, I don't mind informing the federal military. Right now, I haven't informed them because I respect the role of a negotiator. Tai Ziyuan said calmly, once you leave the scene of the ball, perhaps I really will have the Federation government do everything in their power to capture you. There has always been a saying that if the anti-government army didn't have you, they would have long become a dish in the hands of the government. This kind of temptation is actually no less than reaching a peace agreement. Hearing these words, the middle-aged man smiled slightly. After fighting with the Federation government for so many years, he knew better than anyone how much these privileged people in the Federation wanted to destroy the business in the mountains. These people who truly controlled the Federation were cold and heartless. However, he was sure that the other party wouldn't make a move at this moment at least, because this wasn't in line with the true interests of the other party's family. This time, he was taking a huge risk. He didn't even hesitate to expose his most successful spy within the Federation to meet with the successor of the Tai family. On one hand, it was because the anti-government army situation was indeed very dangerous. On the other hand, there was an even more important personal reason. He wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of person the new leader of the Federation's future was like. This kind of first-hand information was far more important than any kind of intelligence. Seeing Tai Ziyuan, the middle-aged man wasn't disappointed, but he was somewhat disappointed. He wasn't disappointed because he was sure that this successor of the Tai family wasn't a stupid person. However, this was also the reason why he was disappointed. Moreover, he could see that this person didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy or moral support for the anti-government army. Everything that was presented in the conversation was a naked judgment of benefits. As if he could guess what this second-in-command of the anti-government army was thinking, Tai Ziyuan slowly said, today, when the Empire is preparing to launch an invasion at any time, the anti-government army is still dividing the hearts of the people of the Federation for those illusory reasons, wasting the Federation's resources, and restricting the military strength of the Federation. In my eyes, you should all be considered traitors. The Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't give you legal status. The middle-aged man thought for a moment and then said seriously, you and the family behind you are vested interests in the political structure of the Federation. Your opinion might not necessarily be correct. If the Empire really invades, I believe that in terms of resisting the enemy, the soldiers in the mountains will be more respectable than the people of the 4 major military regions of the Federation. There's no need to judge things that haven't happened yet, Tai Ziyuan said, no words can change the image of the anti-government army in my heart. We have never cared about how the important figures of the Federation view our cause. Perhaps in the distant future, we are destined to be a pair of natural enemies that can't coexist, but at least for now, we can work together, the middle-aged man said. The coexistence of a cat and a mouse might be a very interesting thing. I really want to know who is the cat, and who is the mouse. The will of the people cannot be resisted. The 7 major families are deformed existences. No matter how strong they are, there will be a day when they will become a street rat that everyone wants to beat down in front of the tide of history, the middle-aged man said calmly. This is Mr. George Carlin's opinion, and it is to encourage you. I will never deny this, Tai Ziyuan said. But I always think that you are the big rats of human society. We can still work together if our paths are different, but if we don't agree, there is no need for a deeper conversation. The middle-aged man stood up with a smile and said, if there is any good news, please inform that young man. If there is no good news, I will pour a cup of wine for your friend's friend in the mountains as a memorial. Tai Ziyuan stood up with a smile, ignoring the psychological attack of the other party. He said, one last question. Where does your confidence come from? Why didn't the Federation catch you after confirming that you left the ball, just like when you followed Sulu upstairs to make sure that there was no danger? Information is the source of all power. The middle-aged man bowed elegantly, which didn't match his vulgar temperament. And my ability is a secret. Lai Ziyuan was silent for a long time before he said, after this short cooperation, I will aim to destroy your armed forces for a longer period of time. But I have to say, in the entire universe, I only admire 5 people, and you are one of them. Today, I am able to negotiate with you for the first time since my coming-of-age ceremony. I have benefited greatly. I am very curious about which 5 people. I wonder if young Master C can satisfy this little vanity of mine. The middle-aged man's eyes lit up, showing just the right amount of curiosity. Other than you, there is that ignorant man by the lake, George Carlin, whose fate is unknown. My distant relative from 8 generations ago, the current director of the Bureau of Proclamation, and the Empire's princess, who is said to have reached Mecha level 6 at the age of 12, Tai Ziyuan said seriously. In my life, I will work hard for the 5 of you. Oh, human strength is sometimes exhausted. Everyone has their own areas of expertise. For example, in the field of information, I don't believe that there is anyone in this world who is better than me. Of course, this is still my secret. Then there is that old man in Philadelphia. I don't think there is anyone in this world who is stronger than him in terms of individual combat power. Young Master C, don't push yourself too hard. Hard work doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve it. Tai Ziyuan smiled and said, actually, I only hope that in the future, all the outstanding people in the Federation will become my subordinates. The middle-aged man sighed in admiration. Although the son of an aristocratic family is disgusting, this kind of self-confidence is indeed terrifying. The second-in-command of the anti-government forces appeared in the core area of the Federation just like that, and then quietly left, not even leaving behind a shadow. He only left a clue for the Tai family to follow. However, if the Tai family was willing to accept the conditions of the anti-government forces, that clue would be a secret that the Tai family had to keep. Tai Ziyuan raised his wrist to look at the time. After silently counting a few times in his mind, he said to Butler Jean beside him, prepare a secret line. I want to talk to my mother. Butler Jean nodded in agreement. They had already given that person enough time to leave. If he really fell into the hands of the federal military, it would only mean that there would come a day when the legend would lose its luster. He used the identity of Uncle Shi Qinghai. After Butler Jean gave the order to his subordinates, he said softly, Shi Qinghai graduated from University 1 and is a very important young official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. Who would have thought that he was actually a spy for the anti-government forces? I'm more curious about why the most successful intelligence chief of the 37th constitutional era deliberately left Shi Qinghai for us. Tai Ziyuan closed his eyes and said, using the life of a spy as a safety valve to test the sincerity of the family doesn't seem to be in line with that person's usual style of doing things. Keep an eye on Su Lu and Shi Qinghai. Tai Ziyuan's face was expressionless. Ensure that the former is not harassed. prepare to contact the latter, or arrest him. After leaving the ball, Sulu didn't know that Uncle Shi and Tai Ziyuan had a very far-reaching conversation. At this time, he was walking among the snowy trees of the university campus in low spirits. He didn't have the self-awareness of a person involved in history at all. He was just a small figure, but this small figure had indirectly caused a small ripple in the great era. Of course, in the current difficult situation, the anti-government forces were willing to temporarily give up the political ideology that they had always believed in. That person even took a huge risk to come to the Federation to negotiate with them personally. Presumably, even if Sulu didn't exist in this world, they would still do everything they could to find Tai Ziyuan. But the problem was, if Sulu didn't exist, then at this ball, it was very likely that Senator Macklin's people or some other forces had beaten them to it. They had persuaded the Tai family and the Tai family's chosen partner, Senator Pabre. A thin layer of snow still accumulated on the grass by the Rose River. It glowed faintly under the moonlight. In his suit, Sulu felt a sliver of cold. He blew on his hands, but wasn't worried that he would catch a cold. Ever since he had started practicing that strange set of movements with the uncle, it seemed that it was very difficult for him to get sick. His gaze shifted from the two moons above his head to the east, and he saw that familiar female apartment building. The plum garden was still there, but Su Li's heart was unusually calm. He knew that Zhang Xiaomeng had a secret, but if the other didn't want to tell him, he wouldn't want to investigate further. The inside of his GU suit was filled with cold sweat. After finding out about Tai Ziyuan's shocking identity, Su Li's emotions were very complicated. That conversation from before had made him very nervous. He stubbornly maintained his calm in front of the other just to preserve his little bit of self-esteem. Even if the self-esteem of a small figure was somewhat pitiful in front of a person with special privileges in the Federation. For the time being, he didn't dare to go to Area H1. Although everyone thought that the person inside the Black Mecha was Tai Ziyuan, Sulu still didn't dare to take the risk. At this time, it was already late at night. He suddenly found that he had nowhere to go, but he didn't want to go back to his room in the Pear Garden. Only now did he understand that after escaping from the Eastwoods district to the capital ring for a year, he was still just a lonely and pitiful fellow. Right at this moment, he suddenly saw that on a remote embankment by the cold Rose River, there was a smear of red that burned like fire in the night. It was flashing incessantly in the cold wind. It was Zhou Yu in her red suit. There was an orphan girl by the night river. Although Sulu loathed the character of the Zhou siblings, he still couldn't help but worry when he saw this scene. He walked quietly in the direction of the embankment, afraid that he would startle the other and cause the other to do something crazy. However, before he could get close to the embankment, he saw a very familiar figure dashing out from the frosty grass outside the embankment and pouncing directly on the red suit. In the distance, the sounds of Zhou Yu struggling, cursing in a low, angry voice, and crying could be heard. Chapter 110. Shi Qinghai was in a terrible mood. Ever since his boss arrived in Linhai, his mood had never improved. As a professional, he had been a spy within the Federation for so many years. He had always carefully hidden his identity and completed many missions assigned by the organization. He did feel very tired, but sometimes when he thought about it, he would feel proud and proud. However, he never thought that after working so hard within the Federation for so long, he would have to face such a dangerous situation because of the organization's sudden idea, regardless of the outcome of the negotiations between the anti-government forces and the Crown Prince. Shi Qinghai knew that his identity could no longer be hidden. Even if the Federation temporarily ignored him, after this incident, the Tai family would definitely not care about his life. If he was arrested by the Federation, what awaited him would be a life sentence. Shi Qinghai knew that there was no light in front of him. He could only wait and see when the darkness would come. He had thought about leaving, but in the Federation, where could he go? Unless he returned to S2's Huanshan Sizhou. However, the organization did not give him an order to leave. If he returned without an order, it would be no different from betraying the organization. In the anti-government forces cause, people like him were just pawns that could be sacrificed at any time. No one cared about their safety. This fact made him feel very bad. His handsome face was full of gloomy lines. He sat by the Rose River embankment, waiting for the final judgment to come. In the end, he did not expect to see the scene of a girl in a red dress jumping into the river. He pushed Zhou Yu to the ground. Looking at this woman's cold eyes, beautiful face, and extremely cruel expression towards others and herself, Shi Qinghai did not know why he felt extremely angry. He said in a low voice, "I really don't know if you have a brain. It's just a little boy who didn't choose you to be his bed partner. Do you have to live or die?" Zhou Yu, who was pushed to the ground, stared at Shi Qinghai's hateful face. She suddenly struggled and roared like an angry lioness, "It's all your fault. It's all your fault." Zhou Yu was not sure if she liked the crown prince brother, because in these 2 years, she had only seen him twice. But in these years, everything seemed to convince her that she should like Tai Ziyuan. She had to like Tai Ziyuan. However, today's double moon festival ball made everything disappear. Thinking of the noble lady who had always been generous with her love for her, and thinking of all these years of waiting, she felt cold in her heart. It seemed that there was nothing worth cherishing anymore. So she left her friends, left the ball, and came to the quiet Rose River embankment. Perhaps she just wanted to commemorate her past in the cold moon, but she did not expect to attract a hungry wolf. Shi Qinghai was a very delicate guy, but he was very strong. Zhou Yu, whose wrist was held by him, could not get up no matter how hard she struggled. Shi Qinghai felt the soft body under him. At the moment when he was ready to die, he suddenly felt a trace of excitement that he had not felt for a long time. After being a playboy for many years, he seemed to have become numb to women. But today, on the grass, looking at Zhou Yu's helpless and beautiful face, he gradually had a reaction. In the cold night, this pair of hostile men and women, because of their different experiences, had the same feelings of disappointment and sadness. They rolled on the grass and stared at each other fiercely. Zhou Yu found that she was not as strong as this man. After looking at him quietly for a moment, she exerted strength in her waist and abdomen and bit Shi Qinghai's palm. Shi Qinghai's handsome face twisted, and the back of his hands suddenly bled. He was angry and slapped Zhou Yu's head. He scolded, "Do you think I really have tender feelings for women?" Zhou Yu looked at him coldly and said, "Either you kill me today, or you wait to be killed. Once is enough for this kind of threat." Shi Qinghai stared at the fierceness on the woman's face and suddenly felt very excited. He said in a low voice, "Don't forget how I treated you when you threatened me in the garden." The wound on Shi Qinghai's thin lips proved that the scene in the garden after the ball was erotic and intense. The young man and woman on the thin snowy grass seemed to have thought of that scene at the same time. Some strange emotions appeared in their eyes, and almost at the same time, they made the same move and kissed each other fiercely. Su Le stood at the edge of the woods and stared blankly at the scene by the river embankment. He could not understand how the story had developed into such an erotic scene. He thought that Mr. Shi was indeed a hooligan, and that Zhou Yu was indeed a psychopath. He had infinite admiration for them. There was nothing for him to do, and he did not know where to go. He scratched his head and walked to the iron gate of the Pear Garden. At around 11:00 the next day, an automatic alarm rang in a room in an apartment building in Linhai. Shi Qinghai immediately opened his eyes. Although in the hearts of all his colleagues, he was an extremely lazy and depraved playboy, but the good habits of a spy always played a role in certain details. Avoiding the scattered wine bottles under the bed, Shi Qinghai walked into the bathroom. After quickly washing up and dressing up, he made himself a very nutritious breakfast and began to read today's electronic newspaper. After reading the newspaper, he threw the plates into the sink and walked back to the bedroom. He began to stare blankly at the women on the bed who were still in a deep sleep. Outside the window, it was already cold and snowy, but inside the window, it was as warm as spring. The woman on the bed was completely naked. Her red dress was thrown on the corner of the bed, and the thin red silk quilt was carelessly draped over her, revealing her smooth, jade-like back and the shocking curves of her waist and hips. The woman was sleeping with her face facing the window, and only her graceful back was exposed to Shi Qinghai. Her jade-like skin contrasted with the red silk quilt made her look particularly attractive. Half of her plump butt was covered, and her slender, smooth thighs were completely covered. Only the faint lines could be seen, which added to her seductiveness. Shi Qinghai had forgotten how much wine he drank last night. He did not know how many one-night stands he had in his life, but quietly looking at the woman on the bed, looking at her full of seductive curves and her naturally wavy hair, there was a strange feeling in his heart. If it were not for the constant fear of being arrested by the Federation, he might never have had sex with such a troublesome person, especially when he was very clear about this woman's background and her coldness. "Don't pretend to be asleep," Shi Qinghai said indifferently. "I have to go to work today." Zhou Yu lazily turned over on the bed, her eyes still closed. The remnants of makeup between her eyebrows were not ugly, but instead gave off a beautiful feeling like a red flower after the rain. She subconsciously pulled up the thin, red quilt to cover her chest, then slowly opened her eyes and asked, "What time is it?" 11 o'clock. Hearing Zhou Yu's somewhat hoarse voice, Shi Qinghai, the playboy, actually felt a little shaken. He thought of the madness last night, and the woman on the bed who seemed to be lewd, but was actually a little inexperienced. At the beginning, it was hard, but at the end, it was a river. Zhou Yu sat up on the bed, turned around, and began to put on her clothes. She slightly lowered her head and said indifferently, "Don't let anyone know what happened last night." "I think so too," Shi Qinghai said calmly. Zhou Yu's back slightly stiffened. After a moment, she said, "Don't say you know me in the future." "That's what I think too." Shi Qinghai's reply was still as calm and cold as ever. Zhou Yu put on her clothes and walked to the door of the apartment. Then, without any warning, she burst into tears. Her tears washed over her face like rainwater, turning the remnants of the makeup into a field of flowers, a field of flowers. Shi Qinghai looked at her quietly. He knew that this woman was not crying because of his attitude. Maybe she was crying because of something that she herself did not fully understand. He knew that Zhou Yu was really crying, heartbreakingly, desperately, crying for the past, crying for the past, crying for herself, crying for others. This rogue official of the Investigation Bureau of the Federation knew women very well. Even when women were crying, they would care very much about whether they looked good or not. Only when they really treated themselves like a broken pot, would they grimace, with snot bubbles coming out of their noses, and contort their facial features in pain, just like Zhou Yu at this moment. "Don't cry. I'm about to die, but I didn't cry." "What do you have to cry for?" Shi Qinghai's expression was particularly gloomy. At this moment, the intercom in the apartment rang. Shi Qinghai picked it up and noticed that the red light was coming from the intercom. This meant that it was a secret call from an unknown line, and that it had gone beyond the legal monitoring of the Investigation Bureau. After a moment of silence, he picked up the phone. Then, he heard a strange voice, "The initial plan has been reached. We need more details." After this sentence, the phone was abruptly cut off. Shi Qinghai's expression became more and more solemn. At this time, he still did not know the details and results of the negotiation between the middle-aged man and the crown prince last night. However, this phone call indicated that the negotiation seemed to have been successful, and that he did not have to start running away immediately. The work began. Shi Qinghai put down the phone and took a deep breath. When he turned around, he found that the girl in red had already disappeared. "I'll be very busy these days." Su Lu listened to the voice on the other side of the phone quietly. He did not answer, but listened very carefully to Shi Qinghai's words. "You know that I'm an official of the Investigation Bureau, and I often have to carry out some shady missions. So, maybe one day I'll disappear." Shi Qinghai said casually on the other side of the phone, "If one day I really disappear, don't worry too much, and don't try to find me." His voice was relaxed, but Sulu smelled a trace of an inauspicious sign. He wanted to ask, but from his friend's tone, he could tell that it was impossible for him to tell the truth. The problem now is that my missions are all secret. If I disappear, maybe the investigation bureau will investigate you. Shi Qinghai's voice on the other side of the phone became extremely serious. Just tell the truth. Don't try to hide anything in front of those professionals. You can't hide anything from them. Besides, we're just ordinary friends. They should be able to find out the truth. I don't know how you know Tai Ziyuan, and there's no need to know now. I just want to remind you that if you run into big trouble after I disappear, you can try to mention his name. I believe there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Sulu had been quietly listening to Shi Qinghai's instructions, but at this time, he couldn't help but ask, no matter how secret a mission is, there will be a day when it's completed. If your disappearance means that you won't come back, I hope you can still let me know. After all, I don't have many friends in the Federation. Shi Qinghai paused for a moment on the other side of the phone, then said, I'll try my best. Sulu held the phone tightly, squinted his eyes out of habit, and said seriously, no matter what kind of trouble you're in, I hope you can take care of yourself. After this phone call, Shi Qinghai disappeared from Su Li's life. After a few days, Sulu even went to the Linhai field office to look for him. In the end, the members of the 4 departments said that Section Chief Shi had taken a 2-month-long leave. No one knew where he was going. Sulu couldn't help but worry, but in the situation where he couldn't contact him, there was nothing he could do. The mysterious Tai Ziyuan also disappeared with Shi Qinghai. Sulu took the risk to enter the H1 area one night, but he didn't find the coffee in the lounge. However, he confirmed that Tai Ziyuan should still be on campus, but he seemed to be busy with something. For a moment, Sulu was extremely dissatisfied with his life. It was rare for him to have 2 or 3 friends, but all of them seemed to come and go like ghosts, mysteriously disappearing just like that. He thought to himself in annoyance, could it be that in this world, there was someone more mysterious than him? After the late autumn came the cold winter. Heavy snow piled up on the streets of Linhai University. The biting cold wind made most of the students choose distance learning instead of leaving the apartment to listen to the professor's lectures. Sulu still walked through the pear garden, wearing the green military windbreaker that Mrs. Zhong gave him. He braved the wind and snow, silently studying, and silently living his life. The aftermath of the Double Moon Festival dance party had already dissipated, and the students on the road pointed at Sulu had already disappeared. The only interlude was that the son of the Sun family, who had his front teeth knocked out by Sulu, sent a gift to express his intention to reconcile. It was also through this detail that Sulu understood that the heir of the Tai family was indeed an existence that was infinitely revered in certain circles in the Federation. Chapter 111. Su Li's hand that was holding the phone froze for a moment, then he simply said, okay. He put the phone away and came back to his senses. It had been more than 20 days since the ball, and he hadn't seen Zhang Xiaomeng for more than 20 days. He looked at his class schedule and realized that the next day was the last day of December. Of course, there were no classes. He realized that the peace and solitude had lasted for so long that he had forgotten about the arrival of the new year. At this time, Zhang Xiaomeng was in a daze in her single apartment. She glanced at the black-rimmed glasses by her hand, and her delicate face showed a trace of distress and struggle. After the Double Moon Festival ball, Tai Ziyuan disappeared again, and she couldn't find any opportunity to get close to that person. The failure of this mission didn't make Senator Macklin unhappy. On the contrary, the fatherly elder comforted her and told her to be careful and hide her identity. At the same time, he secretly pointed out that since the male student named Su Lu met Tai Ziyuan by chance, perhaps there would be a good result if she set out from there. Should she use Su Lu to get close to that person? Zhang Xiaomeng's long eyelashes fluttered twice, and she immediately rejected this idea. She didn't want to hurt that man again after hurting him. On the last day of the 66th year of the 37th Constitution, the Federation was immersed in the atmosphere of celebrating the new year. Although the Empire, which was light years away and across the galaxy from the West Woods, was still a shadow in the hearts of the Federation citizens, the front lines were too far away, and everyone subconsciously didn't think about that problem. The people of the Federation cast their anxious gazes toward the S2 region. After the election in the S2 region surrounded by the mountains, the Federation government's accusations against the opposition members intensified, accusing them of not really laying down their weapons. The federal military also began to step up its preparations for war. The outbreak of the Civil War once again seemed to be inevitable. Senator Medellin, who was born in the anti-government army, had successfully been elected as a member of the new Federation Management Committee. He had truly entered the core political area of the Federation. However, no matter how loudly he shouted in various meetings in the capital special district, he could not really eliminate the danger of civil war. This was because everyone knew that Senator Macklin could influence the people in the 4 states, but he could not influence the anti-government armed forces in the mountains. After years of embargoes and economic sanctions by the Federation, the anti-government forces in the mountains were on the brink of collapse. They could not just wait to be suppressed by the federal army. They would definitely choose some kind of counterattack. Although there were so many worries, for the ordinary citizens of the Federation, life had to go on. These questions about politics and life and death could only make them sigh and lament when they read the electronic newspaper. On New Year's Eve, all the famous restaurants were fully booked, and the neon lights of the amusement park began to shine in the daytime, creating a peaceful and happy scene. Family members and lovers who had holidays occupied the large Ferris wheel and the special restaurants in the world of ice and snow. Compared to the liveliness, the towering Iron Tower in Linhai had lost its charm as a tourist attraction and became incomparably quiet. This was because not many people were willing to run to the top of the Iron Tower in such a cold winter. Sulu didn't take the elevator. Instead, he carried his backpack and climbed up the Iron Tower step by step. His face was slightly red, and beads of sweat seeped out from his hair. However, his breathing was still steady, and he didn't feel tired at all. Today, he could already train his nerves and muscles in his daily life, making the mysterious power in his body more and more peaceful, and also more and more powerful. The cold wind whistled on the sightseeing floor of the Iron Tower. The orange-colored lights were pulled into lonely lines, nestled on the cold metal body. There was no one, only a girl in a dark brown windbreaker by the railing in the distance. She was holding her chin and looking at the city scenery of Linhai in a daze. She wore a cute velvet hat and pink gloves. Her long eyelashes blinked in the cold wind, but as if she did not feel the cold, she just quietly looked outside the railing. Sulu was a dozen meters behind her, quietly looking at her, somewhat lost in thought. They had not seen each other for a few days, but when they met again, his state of mind returned to the original situation, incomparably calm and happy. "You're here." Zhang Xiaomeng turned around and smiled at him. Sulu walked up and gently smiled. He took off the backpack on his back and threw it at her feet. Standing beside her, he followed her gaze and looked outside the railing. He saw a few clouds floating in the snowless sky, and on the roofs of the buildings in Linhai, there were traces of ice and snow left from this winter. The whole city was in a New Year's atmosphere, but he still felt a little lonely. "The scenery here is not very good." Sulu imagined the girl's mood when she looked here and said, "Why did you want to meet here?" "When I was young, my parents were very busy with work, and I didn't want to sit in those small rooms on the Ferris wheel, so I like to come here to see the scenery by myself." Zhang Xiaomeng exhaled a mouthful of fog and stared blankly at the shadow of the Ferris wheel in the distance. She said, "That day at the ball, I refused to dance with you. I hope you don't mind." "I said that day, I don't know how to dance." Sulu still narrowed his eyes and looked at the gray sky. He said, "If you still want to say sorry today, I think it's meaningless. Although I have never been in love, I know there is no right or wrong in this kind of thing. You've changed a bit." Zhang Xiaoming suddenly turned her head to look at him and laughed. That time in front of the teaching building, you were much more eloquent than you are now. Su Lu also thought of that conversation and said with a smile, back then, I saw things too simply. He turned his head and quietly looked at the light flowing in Zhang Xiaoming's eyes. He noticed that she was not wearing her black-rimmed glasses today. He said softly, until today, I still think things are very simple. It's just that, other than me, people in this world always have a habit of making simple things very complicated. Zhang Xiaoming did not expect to hear this. She lowered her eyes and fell into deep thought. After a long time, she said softly, maybe it's because I am a very complicated person, and you are a very simple person. No, you are a very simple person, but you want to do very complicated things. Su Li's hand was holding the railing, and he felt that the railing was as cold as ice. He withdrew his hand and exhaled. He asked, what is your secret? Zhang Xiaoming was silent for a long time. She said, a year ago, I was doing voluntary support work in the office of Senator Medellin in S2. I know that. There are many young people in the Federation who go to the 4 states to do this kind of work. Su Lu said, you are back, and the government has determined that you are a returnee. This shouldn't be a problem. The problem is, until today, I am still working for Senator Medellin. Zhang Xiaoming suddenly smiled, but her smile was cold. After hearing Zhang Xiaoming's true identity, Su Lu fell silent. After a long time, he said softly, and then? Although I have not received professional espionage training, what I do is actually not much different from a spy. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and looked at the heavy backpack by her feet. She said, I came back to Yue University for only one purpose, and that is to get close to Tai Ziyuan and help the senator establish some kind of direct connection with him. And then? Zhang Xiaoming looked at him with slight surprise. She continued, other than the Double Moon Festival Ball, I have no other way to get close to the mysterious heir of the Tai family. Oh, right, you might not know his true identity yet. Su Lu shook his head and stopped this question. He asked calmly, and then? No matter what Zhang Xiaoming said, Su Lu only replied with 3 words, and then. Zhang Xiaoming looked at him quietly. She took off a pink cotton glove from her hand and put it on his hand. She lowered her head and said softly, you don't seem surprised at all, and you don't seem angry. Actually, the number of strange things I've encountered in my life is more than you can imagine. Su Lu put on the glove on his left hand, and his right hand naturally held her hand. He looked at her and said seriously, I just don't understand what these things have to do with what happened between us. I am a spy. Zhang Xiaoming looked at him seriously. She didn't understand and said, are you not afraid at all? Su Lu muttered a few words in annoyance. He thought to himself, I'm still a fugitive. He sighed and shook his head. He gently parted Zhang Xiaoming's hair under her cap. He looked at her smooth forehead and said with pity, if this is your secret. I guessed it a long time ago, but I didn't think that the truth I guessed was the truth. Zhang Xiaoming laughed bitterly. She turned her head and looked at the sky outside the railings. She said, I know I hurt you, and I shouldn't have said these things. But if I don't explain it to you, I will feel very bad. You wanted to get close to Tai Ziyuan, so you left me. Su Lu helped her organize the messy information. After a moment of silence, he said, and now you realize that I know Tai Ziyuan. If you wanted to get close to him, it would have been more convenient for you to stay by my side. You didn't look for me for so many days. It is clear that you don't want to look back. If I were to return to you under these circumstances, it would be an insult to both of us. Zhang Xiaoming let go of his hand and held her face. Her face was full of relief and determination. I won't let myself do such a thing. Su Li's mood was slightly better. You once asked me what I thought of George Carlin's theory and the people in S2. I once said that I sympathized with them and was willing to support them, but I don't understand. Is it because you are willing to sacrifice something, you can sacrifice the love between us? Zhang Xiaomeng's nose wrinkled in distress. She sighed and said, maybe you think it is funny, but it is my belief. And I will definitely return to S2 in the future. Your dream is to be the chief engineer of the Shell Motor Company. The two of us don't have a future to begin with. Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. You are here today. It seems that the people you serve have new requirements for you. Su Li's eyes narrowed. He said mockingly, I respect any belief, but a belief that requires one to sacrifice one's feelings and betray one's feelings. In my opinion, it is a disgusting thing. Zhang Xiaomeng felt his anger. She silently changed the topic. The pressure on S2 is too great. The soldiers and workers living in the mountains are about to be attacked by the federal military. And the only ones who can change the will of the Federation government are those big families. Tai Ziyuan is the heir of the Tai family, one of the 7 big families. If Senator Macklin can gain his trust, he will be able to help the people in the mountains get through these difficult times. In your opinion, I betrayed the feelings between us for some illusory belief. But in reality, I am doing this for the sake of those fresh lives. After a long silence, Su Lu said, I haven't seen Tai Ziyuan for many days. I may not be able to help you on your side. I just want to confess everything to you. Zhang Xiaomeng looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Su Lu took her into his arms. His hands slipped into her brown windbreaker. Sticking close to her soft and warm body, he hugged her tightly and refused to let go. He sniffed the faint fragrance around her neck and said, You are my first woman. Zhang Xiaomeng leaned into his arms and said, You are my first man. I like you. I like you too. Are you really going to leave me? Yes. Then what is it between us? What was that night? Was it charity for a poor man like me before he died? Su Li's voice suddenly became angry. Zhang Xiaomeng lowered her head and held his chin like a kitten. She said faintly, Just think of it as charity for me. Maybe then you won't be so unhappy. Have you ever thought that those big shots who play politics are just using you? Have you ever thought that you're just a girl who doesn't know anything? You're very childish. Su Lu stood up straight, forgetting that she was still a young girl who wasn't even 20 yet. She looked into Zhang Xiaomeng's eyes with melancholy. Zhang Xiaomeng smiled, but tears began to flash in her eyes. Her nasal voice was very strong. She said with a sniffling voice, I am still young. I have to be childish while I can. At this moment, Su Lu knew that he couldn't persuade her to leave that strange world. He vaguely understood the philosophy and thoughts of some people in this world. At this moment, he began to understand this girl's stubbornness and began to feel the sadness that came early. Chapter 112. After the fireworks bloomed, Su Lu and Zhang Xiaomeng walked down the iron tower. The stairs were so long, but the two of them hoped it would be longer. Just as the New Year bell rang, they warmed each other and held hands like a real couple. They strolled along the bustling streets of Linhai, not thinking about anything. When they walked in front of the big holographic screen at the intersection of the city center with freshly baked bread in hand, it was the last-minute countdown of the 66th year of the constitutional calendar. There was a sea of people at the intersection of the street. Young people with excited and praying expressions were watching the constantly changing numbers on the holographic screen. Su Lu smiled. He glanced at Zhang Xiaomeng in his arms and said, See? Actually, most people's lives are normal and full like this. The crowd was crowded, and the chill of winter was forced back. Zhang Xiaomeng, whose cheeks were slightly red, took off her hat and said, But we can't always just look at the surface. The two of them were silent in the sea of people, quietly cuddling together. It was strange to say that this young man and woman were used to being silent in front of others. Only when they were together did they seem to have more words and expressions. 10, 9, 8, 7. As the numbers on the huge screen changed, the people in the square at the crossroads began to loudly count down. Their voices became louder and louder, more and more orderly, shaking the two bright moons in the sky. 3, 2, 1. The numbers finally reached 0, and the 66th year of the constitutional era took its last step. The second hand of the new year welcomed the cheers of countless people and ribbons in the square. Happy New Year! Happy New Year 67! People happily waved the scarves and hats in their hands and blew the trumpets to add noise to the New Year's atmosphere. Their companions began to hug each other, and the young men took advantage of the New Year's atmosphere to bravely hug the girls they didn't know. Zhang Xiaomeng held back her laughter as she was dragged away by Su Lu away from this noisy and dangerous area. At certain moments, the possessiveness and jealousy displayed by young men would be extremely cute, making a girl's heart feel sweet. However, that trace of sweetness turned into calmness and disappointment in an instant. She looked at Su Lu and said, "My mission has failed, so it's also over. There's no meaning in staying in Yue University anymore. I'll probably return to S2 the day after tomorrow." Su Lu remained silent. He didn't say anything like waiting for her. After this parting, he didn't know when they would meet again. He also didn't try to keep her. The situation in the 4 prefectures was too critical. She had to return to the place she missed and fight with those strangers. Be careful. He lowered his head and put the glove back on her hand. He gently held it and then gave her a New Year's hug. Suddenly, his gaze moved from Zhang Xiaomeng's shoulder to the hologram screen in confusion. This was because he discovered that the face of Jian Shuier, who was doing the New Year's greeting on the Federation TV station, had suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a very familiar news anchor. At the same time, Su Lu wasn't the only one who noticed the change in the hologram screen. The people in the square at the end of the street also looked at the hologram screen in confusion. The female news anchor's expression was slightly flustered. She said, "Now, we'll broadcast a piece of news that our station has just received." After saying this, the good news anchor immediately calmed down. A piece of news from a reliable source has confirmed, the Federation TV station's news often had a break in breaking news, but on this special occasion of the new year, it was undoubtedly a very important thing to do. The people in the square at the end of the street quieted down. They looked at the huge hologram screen with a trace of uneasiness and listened to the female news anchor's voice in the air. The female news anchor's voice was a bit hurried, but there was an unconcealable joy between her eyebrows. The people in the Federation who were watching this news immediately felt relieved. It seemed that the president was not assassinated, nor was it the Empire taking advantage of the Federation's new year to launch a brazen invasion. Then what kind of good news would make the Federation TV station's director make the decision to break in the broadcast at the first possible moment? Just half an hour ago, the Federation Management Committee member Mr. Pabre's transport plane has landed at the Green Dragon Mountain Airport in Region S2. The Green Dragon Mountain Airport is the only air passage between Green Dragon Mountain and the outside world. Currently, it is still under the control of the anti-government forces. The following is the image that our station has just received. The people in the square at the end of the street looked at the hologram screen in disbelief. They saw a tall man wearing a gray windbreaker, under the protection of several aides, walking down the gangway of a shabby transport plane. And below the transport plane, several leaders of the anti-government forces greeted him with a serious expression. The tall man's face was a bit dark, the lines of his face were as sharp as a knife, showing this person's resolute character. His lips were a bit thick. He was the rising political star of the Federation in the past 2 years, Member Pabre, who was deeply supported by the majority of the middle and lower class people. In the news image on the hologram screen, Member Pabre's broad right hand and the hand of the leader of the anti-government forces were tightly clasped together. At the same time, the Federation TV station's news anchor's voiceover continued to sound. "We don't know when Member Pabre left the capital special district and went to the Green Dragon Mountain military area, but according to the press release sent by the member's office, Member Pabre's trip was invited by the anti-government forces leader Nan Shui to negotiate a settlement agreement. According to the latest news, the two sides have reached an agreement on the specific details of the agreement. Within the next 48 hours, the anti-government forces will fully withdraw from the 4 states around the mountain, maintaining an effective zone of peace between them and the government forces. Member Pabre's office has publicly called for the government and the military to maintain a restrained attitude before the settlement agreement is signed. At the same time, they said that the specific provisions of the settlement agreement will be sent to the Management Committee and the President's office in the shortest time possible. Member Pabre believes that this settlement agreement will certainly satisfy the dignity and demands of all parties. According to our station's reporters in the 4 states, before 8:00 last night, the anti-government forces had already begun to withdraw, but no one expected that this was to welcome Member Pabre's sudden visit. According to analysts, the reason why Member Pabre's office showed such confidence in the press release is because the member has already obtained some kind of promise from the leader of the anti-government forces, Nan Shui. The anti-government forces will make great concessions in the negotiations and accept the 3 key conditions put forward by the government. The crowd in the square at the end of the street, who had been quietly listening to the news, finally burst into cheers at this time. Whether it was from the news or from Member Medellin's busy lobbying activities, the people of the Federation guessed that the military operation in Region S2 was about to begin, and that a civil war was about to break out. This fact cast a shadow over the new year. However, just after the new year, Member Pabre, who took the risk to travel to the anti-government forces area on a transport plane, brought such a big surprise to the people that they couldn't help but cheer. The President's press release has just responded by welcoming the peaceful intentions shown by the anti-government forces at the arrival of the new year. At the same time, they are grateful to Member Pabre for his tireless efforts for peace, and are grateful to Member Pabre for taking the risk to personally travel to the mountain area. However, the press release also said that Mr. President is temporarily unable to understand the specific contents of the agreement, so he is unable to make a specific evaluation. The Management Committee has temporarily maintained silence. A liaison officer of the member's office, who is willing to be named, expressed doubts about the true purpose of Member Pabre's trip. He also insisted that the action without the authorization of the President and the Management Committee is not legal, and that the legendary reconciliation agreement actually has no legal effect. The crowd in the square let out a series of extremely harsh boos. At this time, if the Federation Management Committee dared to pour cold water on this hard-won peace process, it would only cause the dissatisfaction of all the people of the Federation. The official dared not reveal his identity. It was obvious that he was a member who was unwilling to serve him. In the next election, he would be mercilessly abandoned by the angry people. The news footage on the hologram changed to the image of the withdrawal of the anti-government forces that the television station had just received. The anti-government forces wearing dark military uniforms were methodically sitting in armored vehicles, along the rugged mountain road, and retreating into the deep mountains and forests. Immediately after, the news anchor's voice sounded again. The Ministry of Defense still has not officially responded. According to analysts, the federal military has been preparing for the spring offensive for as long as 2 years. It is impossible for them to slow down the pace of preparation for war because of the reconciliation agreement reached by Member Pabre alone with the anti-government forces. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, citing that today is a public holiday, rejected our request for an interview. When she said this, the female anchor's expression was very serious, but her voice deliberately paused. It was obvious that she wanted to use the ridiculous excuse of the Ministry of Defense to be booed by all the people of the Federation. General Zhou Yingxing, the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense, said in his personal capacity during an interview with our station. As a loyal soldier of the Federation, he will firmly carry out every order of Mr. President and the Management Committee. However, he is more willing to let the mechas and bullets of the Federal Army pour down on the land of the Empire people. He is very optimistic about the future prospects of this reconciliation agreement. All the signs show that Senator Prabel's adventure has already borne a lot of fruit. Peace may come, but civil war may not start. The female anchor on the hologram looked at the camera and said with a smile, without a doubt, this is the best New Year's gift that Member Pabre has given to all the people of the Federation in the 67th year of the constitutional calendar. Hearing the cheers around him, and hearing the voice of Member Pabre, Sulu retracted his gaze from the hologram. He couldn't believe his ears and laughed happily. He looked at Zhang Xiaomeng beside him and said, "It looks like you don't have to rush back." Zhang Xiaomeng looked at the images on the hologram in disbelief. She asked in surprise and doubt, why wasn't there any news beforehand? The Member of Parliament doesn't seem to know either. Right at this moment, Su Li's phone rang. A familiar voice that he hadn't heard for a long time came from the other end of the phone. That voice was full of fatigue and faint satisfaction. "My work is done. Where are you? Have a drink with me."